2018, and this is a special workshop of the Alameda County Water District. Would the Secretary please take the roll?
Directors Gunther.
Here.
Akbari.
Here.
Huang. Here. Aziz.
Here.
And Sethy.
Here. And the salute to the flag. About our General Manager. Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time we will take public comments on matters on this notice of the special meeting. Do we have any members of the public that wish to speak? Seeing none, we will move on to the topic of the afternoon, and that is emergency preparedness workshop, and I'll turn it over to the General Manager.
Well, thank you, President Sethy. Living and working in California, we are frequently reminded of the multiple hazards that exist in our service area and our state. For example, in the Bay Area this year, we've seen major fires in Napa and Sonoma, extreme weather, both in terms of unusually high temperatures and very high level of precipitation winter. And then there's this constant threat of a big earthquake from the numerous faults that crisscross our region. For these reasons, the board is always interested in ACWD's emergency response capabilities, and this was very apparent during the board's strategic planning sessions that occurred over the past several months. And based on feedback that staff felt that we received from the board, we felt that it would be helpful for the board to receive an update on ACWD's recent emergency response initiatives and enhancements, as well as an overview of the systems that ACWD uses in the event of large emergencies or incidents. And finally, it occurred to me that although staff has received training over the years, it would be helpful if the board could also receive a briefing on the role of directors during emergencies, as well as subsequent recovery efforts, and to have a common foundation of knowledge when it comes to the systems that the district employs during emergencies. So this is kind of a presentation of Emergency Response 101 for the board. Getting the level of detail correct for this evening is a little tricky because there's various degrees of knowledge about the subject matter among the directors. So for some of you, this may be new information. For some of you, it may be a review. But hopefully after tonight, we'll all share a common foundation, and that's the goal. So Steve Peterson, our Manager of Operations and Maintenance, will have a little more to say, and then we have, I'm sure, an engaging presentation for the board this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The primary purpose of today's workshop is to introduce and to provide an overview to the board of the Incident Command System, or ICS, the Standardized Emergency Management System, called SIMS, and the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. Examples of how these emergency response systems apply to the district will be reviewed, as well as a discussion on what the roles board members will play during a local disaster or catastrophic event. These items have been included in the workshop. Assisting Jake today, we have three guests. Jake will formally introduce the guests during the workshop, but they are Kevin Conan of Command Coaching, Don Boland. He's the Executive Director of the California Utility Emergency Association, and later in the workshop we'll be joined by Ms. Marty Boyer of Communication Advantage. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jake.
Steve, I've been through a few emergencies in my life, starting as a young platoon leader in combat, dealing with the worst there is to see, and then emergencies on the streets, working as a police officer, and as recently as in Sonoma County. And time and again, you're reminded that emergencies is a team effort. And I'm truly grateful that the district as a team has given me an opportunity to have a board workshop tonight. we'll see that there's a lot of effort in preparedness. So we'll review a little bit of what we did last year to increase our preparedness in the district and how we'll move forward. Before I get started on the agenda, some ground rules. I got to imagine kind of a foreign system to those that have not been in emergency response or familiar with ICS NIMS. I'm glad we have this format where it is less formal. If there's something that's just not clear at all, feel free to raise your hand and ask me. I imagine most questions will probably be answered through the presentation, in particular by the subject matter experts. And I will take breaks between speakers to answer those questions. So the agenda tonight, we'll start with some introduction, talk about my office of Security and Emergency Management a little bit, and then we'll move to the main discussion. Back in October, if people remember, at least the leadership in this room, the Sonoma Fire Complex was taking place, and fires were burning. You know, we had a board workshop, and I was hosting an ICS class here, and rightfully so, there was discussion about emergency preparedness. So that's where our main discussion tonight is regarding those topics that were brought up with the district update, how ICS SIMs and NIMS relate to our district, ICS being the Incident Command System, which is our district's command of the emergency here at the local government level. SIMS, Standardized Emergency Management System, which is our state system that enable response in our particular case for our district. And then NIMS, which includes the local response ICS, the state systems, and the national systems, all within the National Incident Management System. After we talk about our discussions of ICS, SIMs, and NIMS, we'll talk about the Board of Directors' roles with preparedness and response phases of emergency. If there's any questions at the end, we'll cover those, and we'll talk about some near-term goals I have for the district. As I said, I'm the district's emergency response and security officer. Kevin Koenig, right here, is of command coaching. I'll go over the bios a little bit later. We also have Don Boland, Executive Director of California Utility Emergency Association. And coming in about 5 o'clock will be Marty Boyer of Communication Advantage. So my office, the Office of Emergency and Security Management, the mission of my office of Emergency and Security Management is to support the district's personnel and critical infrastructure through preparedness, response, and recovery operations. And within my office, I have a budget. I have several contracts that both support my security duty and my emergency services duty. The staffing is me. I'm a direct report to the operations and maintenance manager, and I leverage the staffing with contracts and a lot of support from the departments within our district. I do supervise the Overton Security Guard contract, which provides many services, as the active control service tonight, routine patrols at our district, amongst other duties. Footprint, which you physically see, the representation of my office is our VHF system, which is the tower on Mount Allison, and also Patterson Reservoir, this VOC here, and behind you our alternate dispatch. And in addition, I've got multiple software and website programs used to assist with my responsibilities. Duties of the office. As the district leadership knows, I'm also responsible for security management, and that breaks down to personnel. That is my priority of security management. The over 200 employees we have. Physical security to include what's determined as critical infrastructure. And though I don't take a lead role, I do assist the cybersecurity team with the ever-increasing threats that we have through cybersecurity. And the responsibilities that enable me to perform my duties, provide 24/7 response to employees and alarms. I do conduct investigations, that's both for internal documentation and to support the local authorities, and that is an ever-increasing responsibility. Coordination with local police departments and district attorney's office, generally for in-progress crimes or when charges are filed. Access control, that's both teaching our employees and giving them the proper tools to have access to our facility, and also working with the facilities and our maintenance guys to ensure access control is in place. Employee education and support, that does take up quite a bit of time as well, and we're all for good reason and planning. My other duty is emergency management, and that's what brings us here tonight. When we talk about emergency management, we get addressed it in 3 phases. There's preparedness, response, and recovery. That's common with Cal OES and FEMA. That's how they address emergency management. When we talk about the preparedness phases, we talk about plans, training, exercises, grants, and participation with emergency associations. When we talk about emergency response, the actual emergency happened, now what are we doing? My role comes in when it's beyond the district, or mutual assistance to other districts. And recovery, that's I'd say the biggest amount of work out of those 3 phases. However, tonight we'll just focus on the public assistance or the reimbursement process. My philosophy, and I'm hesitant to use that term because it's based off of legal requirements, doctrine, and my experience. But it's what I see how the office should be ran. During all 3 phases, I'm committed to our district. I say that because as being the representative, the emergency manager for our district, there's several organizations we'll see later that I belong to, and we're involved in constant projects annually. But my priority is always to work with increasing the district preparedness. When addressing preparedness, we say, okay, the big one's going to happen tomorrow. The 8.0 earthquake's going to happen tomorrow. That brings up a lot of topics, a lot of things we can talk about. My number 1 priority is our ability to manage emergencies. And that's a huge effort. Our district has to manage our emergencies. We got contractors that can assist. Government agencies will want to come and help. However, they'll ask us. They won't take over, they'll ask us for direction when they're here. How to address our capabilities, our ability to manage emergencies. You have to start from the ground up. What I mean by that is our workers out there. Whether it's our utility workers, TPOs, TFOs, water supply people, some of our maintenance division, you have to look at their capability to manage emergencies. The EOC, this room here, and the people assigned from different departments, their role is to help coordinate and communicate the response and the incident commanders that are out in the field. And finally, if through our efforts through the years, ICS is implemented in a thorough fashion and kept up, and we have annual training requirements, it's a system that outlets all of us. It's plug and play. It doesn't rely on one person or a group of people. So what's planned for this workshop? District update, how ICS sends NIMS, relates to ACWD, and Board of Director roles during emergency preparedness and response. What's not planned for this workshop? Their duty of district security, and the many other factors we need to think about. Probably have some other, in a different conversation on that help with emergency response to include district guidelines for operational response, district CIP regarding district mitigation, disaster mitigation, all district pre-disaster plans, hydraulic modeling for damage to distribution system, and district GIS-based software use. All of those efforts can be found in Steve Peterson's Hazard Mitigation and Emergency Response Strategic Plan. All right, so moving on to a review of last year and talking with the preparedness phase. A couple important resolutions to point out here. One resolution that was adopted was the 2016 Union C Newark Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. I recently talked to FEMA and they have approved that plan. I just want to point out that it was a multi-departmental effort. It took a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of research, a lot of data collection, a lot of revision. And with that plan, does for us is a few things. One, the plan itself prioritizes different threats to our district, all natural, not man-made, and then it creates an action plan at the end of the plan on what we're going to do to help mitigate those threats. And so, in addition, that plan qualifies us for pre-disaster and post-disaster hazard mitigation grants. And to point out how important it is to have that plan, there's agencies I was talking to a couple of days ago on the phone up north in Sonoma County, and they're under the thumb right now. They're under pressure to really knock out that plan because they don't have one in place, and they don't qualify for these grants they're going to have to need to help get their infrastructure up to speed. So it's good to have that in place. The district also passed a resolution assigning authorized agents to speak on behalf of this district to CalAS and FEMA. Those agents are Mariana, Steve, and myself. That really helps streamline the response and recovery process with those huge organizations, which is another important step. Now I talked about some resolutions that passed, and there are some other efforts we made in preparedness this year was in training. I want to review this quickly because not everyone's aware of all training. We have a large district, and we all have our own responsibilities, so I figured I'd review some of the training that took place last year. In about March last year, I offered the combined ICS SIMS NIMS class to all of our district employees at multiple locations. One, the class is required because we are disaster service workers, and two, it was a good class. Just to get people to hear the language is a big step. Right? To hear the language and to meet, the person that gave the class worked for Alameda County Office of Emergency Services. To meet our counterparts, that's an important step. So I think I got over 80 certificates from our employees, so it was a pretty well-attended class. Distribution Maintenance Division, as I stated, my program, when we're talking about managing emergencies, we need to start from the ground up. We spent over 48 hours of ICS training. It was Distribution Maintenance Division leadership, myself, contractor, and the utility workers themselves, over 48 hours. Myself, I probably put in easily about 100 hours. So that was very good training, and I was proud of what we accomplished with that training. The Emergency Operations Center Command and General Staff, that team that each department's volunteered some members of, attended a few ICS classes last year. Here's a photo of our utility workers. I thought I'd just show that photo, mainly because they do amazing work that goes unnoticed. So for me, part of the joy of having incident command system training with DMD was to meet the guys out there in the field and see what they do. In this particular photo here, this was a main leak on South Denver Boulevard, and it wasn't the only main leak. There was multiple leaks throughout the city at the time, which really challenges you when you're an incident commander or a crew leader, and you're trying to balance the resources and priorities throughout the district. Here is our utility workers in the classroom, and what they're doing is learning how to incorporate the incident command system into their daily use out in the field. And Kevin Conan will speak about that a little bit more in a few seconds here. There's some of our staff that attended the Incident Command System 300 training here at our district in last October. It's a foundational course, and what they did in that class, and myself, is you either reviewed or learned the ICS forms. You learned how to put together an incident action plan, and then through scenario-based training, you respond to these scenarios and you put together a plan to respond to the scenarios. So it's a good course, foundational one, and it's in CalAS's curriculum requirement. Here's the same course that we sent some of our employees to off-site at the San Francisco Department of Emergency Management. I thought our participation in these organizations was worth mentioning for a few reasons. You can see here, we belong to Alameda County Emergency Managers Association. Bay Area Water Multi-Agency Coordination Group, California Utility Emergency Association, California Water Wastewater Area Response Network, Association of Bay Area Government, Urban Area Security Initiative, and Newark Disaster Council. It's a lot of words up there, a lot of organizations, but as a representative of our district, I ensure that I'm always participating with these organizations because it enables you to hit the ground running when you do have an emergency. Just having those relationships and experiences through whether it's training or grant, etc., really pays off. And in particular with Sonoma County, with myself and Dan, when we responded, we already knew those people. The trust was there and enabled us to be quite effective.
Quick question, if I might. You have a Newark Disaster Council. Does Fremont or Union City have a similar entity?
I was told Fremont doesn't, and Newark and Union City does. Okay, last year we did have a few responses that we participated in, so I think that was worth reviewing real quick. The Alameda Creek Search and Recovery of the Missing Driver was one response. Our mutual assistance that we provided to Contra Costa Water District, and our mutual assistance that we provided to the Sonoma Fire Complex. If you guys recall, it's about this time last year we were having the rain. The atmospheric river storms came through. Alameda Creek flooded twice, and one time a driver and a driver drove into the creek. Here you see Jason Warren of Water Supply, and what happened was they drove into the creek. He gets to work. Part of his description is to protect our watershed. He finds out that there's no one out there doing anything, and Jason by default becomes the incident commander. And Jason did a great job here of talking to the missing girl's family. And he showed a lot of empathy. He provided some expertise in topography of the creek, and he also helped with safety. After Jason called me, I called Fremont Fire Department. We got the ball rolling, and eventually went from a one-man show to a unified command of our district, or went to a unified command of CHP and Sheriff's Office, with many people involved in helping out, to include our district, Alameda County, Search and Rescue, Fremont Fire, CHP, and Sheriff's Office. The most recent response we were involved in was the Sonoma Fire Complex. And being a government agency, one government agency put in a request, that being Sonoma County, per EMA, which is the Emergency Management Mutual Assistance process. And they put in a request for several employees within their EOC because many of their employees had to evacuate. And the ones that were working there didn't have a home. And that request went all the way up to Cal OES, came back down to our operational area, Alameda County, and then came to the local government, which we are, and we were able to meet that request. We also participated in a couple recovery events. And to bring this point home, the last time our district participated in a federally declared disaster was 1998. So, in short, it was a busy year last year. We participated in 2 federally declared disasters. DR 4301 was the atmospheric river storm, and then DR 4344 was the Sonoma Fire Complex. Any questions? Or?
No.
I point out Cal OES 89 because this form, which I had to complete for reimbursement of some of the damages to our district, is a project assurances for federal assistance. And within those assurances, you must assure that you comply with SINS. And public assistance is synonymous with reimbursement. So in this picture here, you'll see there's Thomas Nizer of Water Supply and Therese of Project Engineering. What they're doing is damage assessments with FEMA out on Vallecito's channel. And this is part of the NIMS process. And a lot goes on before this happens. FEMA just doesn't show up on your door, right? So before this happened, our off area collected information from all the local governments. The state collected information from all the off areas, and then Governor Brown issued a state of emergency, and he went to the president and asked for a disaster declaration. And then the troops came to help us out, and everybody else. So now to the main topic here, how ICS, SIMs, and NIMS relate to the district. First, I'll start with why the mystery. Because often when we bring up these terms, people just have no idea what it means, or someone has a different understanding of it. And through my experience working for or with multiple government agencies, all the way from the local government to the federal agencies, it's just implemented differently. And that's what happens. So it goes against the whole standardization principle in ICS. That's what happens. ICS is mandated by all agencies, and the way it's implemented isn't always consistent. So it does make a little bit of a mystery. With water utilities in particular, in my time here assessing and building good relationships with our partners in the Bay Area, I've noticed that we're still on the beginning stages of implementing ICS within our utilities. And some utilities have made some pretty good room, advanced pretty far, and frankly, some utilities don't even want to look at it, for whatever reason it is. So why ICS? We'll start for the legal reasons. The California Emergency Services Act of 2015 required each local agency, in order to be eligible for any funding of response-related costs under disaster assistance programs, shall use standardized emergency management system. And SIMs includes the use of the incident command system. To continue why use ICS, it's a question people get when a utility looks at it, or a manager like myself is trying to implement things. Emergencies are the new norm. As the general manager talked about earlier, there's been a lot of emergencies in the state. Climate change is the new norm. When I first came here, we were at the end, the district was at the end of the state's longest drought, or largest drought. And that was immediately followed by the wettest winter our district's ever had. And it was then followed by the biggest fire ever, which we sent Dan and myself up to assist. And then that fire was followed by the biggest fire ever down in Ventura County. So the emergencies are the new norm. And so we've got to be prepared to manage our response to them. Emergencies are unpredictable. However, we can predict how we will respond and manage an emergency. And ICS enables the system to manage emergencies while maintaining business continuity. What I mean by that is, and I saw that in existence in Sonoma County, is that they had personnel within their cities and their counties that had training, and they knew when you hit the button, your work group was so important to the function of the district that you would just continue doing your daily job. It was business continuity. You make sure that happens. Then they had people who had training for emergency management through ICS. And they stopped. They didn't do both jobs. They just focused on managing the emergency. So there's basically a two-pronged approach. Defining ICS. ICS is a combination of facilities, equipment, personnel, procedures, and communications operating within a common organizational structure with responsibility for the management of resources to effectively accomplish objectives pertinent to an incident. How does it relate to our district employees? Well, as I stated, it starts from the ground up. Our incident commanders are in the field, and that's with everybody that has a field workforce. And per California Title 10 Public Safety Code, incident commander means the individual responsible for command of all functions of the field level response. Support staff goes back here, us at HQ, most of us in this room. As we support the incident commander, our EOC will be activated. Those people assigned to the EOC will begin putting the plan together to support the field and coordinate that response, communicate. Everybody else will get their orders from the EOC. They'll continue to do their regular job, or we'll let them know we need more help in the field, need a liaison somewhere else, or need more help in the EOC. District leadership, they'll keep their eye on business continuity, provide strategy for the district, and policy directions for district. So here's the big heavy lifting, and I think why a lot of agencies will turn to ICS, or it may be uncomfortable. How do you implement it? Right, that's the trick. You're mandated to do it. This is what we describe it as, but how do you implement it to your line of work? We start with looking at the principles, which are command, professionalism, planning, organizational structure, facilities and resources, standardization, communication, and information management. And with that said, I'll go ahead and introduce Kevin Conant of Command Coaching. He's an expert in incident command system. I'll just give you a brief bio of Kevin here. Chief Kevin Conant has been serving in fire service since 1978. I was born in 1979. Started in 70. All right, so then my mom had thought of me for 9 years last year. He's an instructor, mentor, and coach. Kevin served as a member of the board of directors for South Santa Clara County Fire District, a battalion chief in San Jose for 15 years. His last assignment was leading Battalion 1A, supervising 12 fire captains on 9 fire companies in the busy and historic downtown for 10 years. Kevin's administrative expertise include strategic planning, deployment, and standards of cover for the Office of Fire Chief. Kevin retired as a senior battalion chief in the San Jose Fire Department in January 2011. He is known for expertise in incident command, leadership, high-rise, windland, and special operations. And finally, Kevin is currently a fire service training specialist with the State Fire Training Division in the California State Fire Marshal's Office, where his primary duties are curriculum development and professional certification.
Kevin. Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, no problem. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Kevin, the terrorist's position's open, you retired.
I hear that. Yeah, thank you, Robert.
You go back up one, Kevin. I did say, as we transition between speakers, I'll open for any questions. Yeah. So I just got one from Director Weed during my presentation. Any other questions arise from anyone else? All right.
It always makes me nervous when someone wants to introduce me as an expert. I prefer the term subject matter expert. Mr. Brinkworth was the Western Regional Sales Manager for Toro Manufacturing. He was an agronomist by education, and he sold Toro products, like the lawnmower, and he had a Ford Country Squire station wagon with a big old trailer, and he'd haul around to country clubs in the cities and to Public Works Department to sell the material. And so he always needed the stuff cleaned up. And so one of my jobs as a young man was cleaning and detailing. He taught me how to detail the equipment, detail the car. And he told me, Kevin, don't ever let anybody call you an expert, because X is the unknown number, and a spurt is a drip under pressure. You guys are water district, and would relate to that. So hopefully I'm not the unknown drip under pressure. Standard conditions call for standard actions to achieve standard outcomes. So the operator of a garbage truck, when they wheel around the corner in your neighborhood, they don't lose their mind when they see cans of garbage sitting on the curb. The expectation is that that's the standard condition. The standard action would be to drive up, pick it up, load it up, and take it off. In the fire service, when we wheel around the corner and there's flames and smoke showing, that's a standard condition. And it would behoove us not to lose our mind and to apply standard actions to achieve standard outcomes. It's the same thing in a water district. Nobody thinks about their water district until they go to their tap and the product they expect to come out that you all provide that is safe, reliable, and affordable with extreme high quality when it doesn't come out. And what's really crazy about our first world problem is we not only water our yards and bathe our bodies in drinking water, we get it without a thought. But when you go to turn that knob or a disaster impacts that, there's an immediate demand by the customer that they want safe, reliable drinking water every day.
And so I was pleased when Robert, over 6 years ago, approached me, the fact that he has a brother who's a deputy chief in the Tempe Fire Department. The Tempe Fire Department is in an area where they are the world's leading expert in doing mutual coordination in incident command. There are 26 agencies that operate as one. They each have their own independent authority, their own councils or boards that manage them and provide policy, but on the street, when it comes to doing standard actions, they operate together, they get standard conditions. Robert saw that growing up, watching his brother operate, and reached out to me and said, is there some way we can apply that locally to the water district? And the answer is yes. And under the guidance of Jake, who he's incredibly humble, he needs to own up to the fact that he's a major in the Guard and is part of the governor's panic button, so he understands this both from a very local level to a very national level, and he also is combat proven as well, so he has seen it at its best in terms of responders getting good training, having good guidance and good policy, and following leaders' intent and being able to do absolutely miraculous outcomes that we celebrate as standard. So for us, when we think about ICS, sadly in the emergency services, probably because we're government, we respond to this catastrophic opportunity of change. It's really hard to budget for something like occurred up in Sonoma, Lake, and Napa counties. It would just be impossible to amass the resources and the preparation for any individual group. And Don's going to be able to talk about what's available to all y'all when it comes to when an event or an incident overwhelms your own local resources. In the 70s, it was the fires in Southern California that the state government said, you know what, when you guys show up and you can't talk to each other and you don't have standardized ways of operating and organizing, we can't have any standardized outcome. There's no way to address the constituency, the customer, with anything other than confusion and frustration along with them. So they demanded that the California Fire Service organize initially in Southern California and try and determine what was the best industry best practice, and quite frankly, we borrowed from the Pentagon. We sent representatives to Arlington and worked with the group that deals with joint military response, because each form of the Department of Defense, they each have their independent identities, but when it comes to the battlefield, they operate as one as best they can. Sadly, not all of California paid attention. I'm a native of Santa Clara Valley, born at Stanford Hospital, as he stated. I was 18 in 1978 when I started in the fire service. I was born in 1960, and I responded to a lot of disasters. One thing that Jake didn't mention is I was also a plans chief on a FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Task Force. You have one on this side of the bay in Oakland that utilizes all the East Bay resources in emergency services. There's another one over on the West Bay out of Menlo Park, and the reason we've done that is obviously there's a big body of water around this urban area, and if we ever have any kind of disaster, they want to be able to mobilize and operate together. And so I've seen disasters at a national level and really accustomed to them at a local level. You all remember the Oakland Hills fire. It was called the Tunnel Incident because it started on Tunnel Road. The sad part about it is we discovered not only did Northern California, but the Bay Area didn't operate like Southern California had. So catastrophic opportunity to change. There was a benefit by having so many policymakers that were from the state legislature that had their homes burned down. They wrote a law and said, if you want reimbursement, you're going to operate the same way. And so they created SENS and said, everybody's got to operate the same way. Then in 2001, we had 9/11, and we noticed that not all agencies at the federal level operated the same way. So President Bush at the time had 2 Homeland Security presidential directives that said, we're going to have a national incident management system. And it seems like our friends out in California really have a system that works. It's been proven It's over 30 years old at that time, and we're going to adopt that nationwide, and that became the NIMS, the National Incident Management System. And you've seen as late as 2015, as Jake talked about, the California Emergency Services Act, what we discovered is that there were a lot of these allied agencies and cooperating and assisting agencies that maybe weren't public safety, but still had a responsibility because of their relationship to critical infrastructure, and that included now water districts and utilities. And they have to become compliant with ICS, SEMS, and NIMS as well. Jake set a point, then he breezed over it quickly, but the role of the EOC, this room, when it's activated, is to both coordinate and communicate. And it's really the role of the field responder out in the street with tactile contact with the customer to be the incident commander. Now, that doesn't relinquish or relieve your responsibilities aboard to both set policy and guide policy, or the general manager's responsibility as what in ICS is called the agency administrator. The incident commander still answers to the agency administrator, just like if a fire occurs in the city of San Jose, me as an incident commander, I run that through the chain of command after the city manager. The manager reports to the council and the mayor as the directing and guidance board. It's identical. And there's often a squeeze between an EOC forming and thinking they're in charge and an incident commander out in the field who is by law in charge. And there's the board through the EOC, through the general manager, gives guidance of communicating and coordinating guidance from a policy directive down to the incident commander. And remember, the guidance that we want is, we want to ensure that we have safe, reliable, affordable drinking water, and at a high quality, and at a level that the customer quite honestly demands and deserves. And to do that, we have to have standard actions to apply to standard conditions to achieve standard outcomes. So for us, the best way to do that is not to talk about it, but that's to get people engaged, to get them involved, and to do that through scenarios. Adults are imitative learners. We imitate, and so when we are taught a best practice and we do it over and over again, we rep good work. Hard work works. So we rep the work and we coach good reps. And what we did is we did dozens of reps of learning how to utilize a tactical worksheet. All ICS builds on a foundation, and all your good decisions as policymakers is based on getting good information that can be analyzed into good intelligence so you can make incredibly informed decisions. If we have a standardized way of collecting data in the field so that we know how to record standard conditions, then we know how to respond with standard actions. So this is an example of one person, and all members did this to 100% demonstrated performance in scenario-based training. And we focus always on what will we do next time. There's absolutely nothing we can do about the past except learn from it and use it as a template to ask, what did we learn and what will we do next time? What will we do better? So we used an incident here that was a unified command incident. We call it the Alvarado scenario. And utilizing the tactical worksheet that's in front of you, we looked at this historic incident and did it from a perspective of not criticizing, but learning and deciding how we were going to do it better next time. That got a lot of media attention. I'll blast through this because this...
It is a sinkhole about the size of a swimming pool.
That kiddo there, he's saying that there's a big sinkhole. This is a pretty decent aerial view of what it looked like early in the incident. And it went on for weeks. Most of you are intimately aware of this. And from every responder that was out there, all the way up to at least Steve Peterson, who I had conversation with, I didn't talk to the general manager, that there were things that we could have learned, and if we could have started off on a stronger foot at the beginning, we'd have a stronger outcome at the end. And a lot of that has to do with how we resource and how we inform. So we used the hot wash document. It's a very honest look retrospectively at what occurred. And then we looked at the timeline so that we could come up with a scenario that was both realistic and it was based on actual events. And we followed step 1 through step 4 of the first page of the tactical worksheet. This document fulfills all the requirements of initial documentation of all incidents. And if you look at this, consider if we had something like the fires of Sonoma County or an earthquake, which is the more likely scenario, simply because of the fuel type. The grass is pretty easy to put out on this side of the valley. So the fact of having a catastrophic fire, other than it not being initiated by an earthquake, an earthquake scenario is the most likely for you to have lots and lots of events that have to deal with multiple leaks in the system and multiple emergencies within the system. All that initial documentation is included in this document. This document was designed by your DMD and the folks, as we would notice if you look up on the upper right-hand side, not only does it have the date, but it has the hour that the last version of this, because we were improving it as we found ways to do it better. This is a 4-page document. This is just a blow-up of what it looks like. This is a recreation of a standard ICS 201 incident briefing form, which is used nationally to be NIMS compliant. So the student would receive the call, and they would determine that it was in October, it was 2 p.m., it was reported sinkhole in Union City and Alvarado Boulevard near Fair Ranch and Freddie. So they would learn to start to set this up in a standardized way. Utilizing the tactical worksheet. The nice thing about a tactical worksheet and why it was really important for me to have one provided for you is, if you know what information we're collecting from the beginning, you know what informed questions to ask all the way up and down the chain of command, and what would be a reasonable expectation for you as a board member or executive staff in terms of what data is being collected. If someone happened to be driving in their personal vehicle on their way home and came across a catastrophic water leak, they could call somebody who's on call, tell them, pull out the tactical worksheet and remind me the things that I should be looking at. It also gives you a standardized briefing of what you should be able to expect both as executive staff and as a board of what information we're collecting from the field. And you can see the real value. If we have multiple emergencies, we get a hold of Don, he gets mutual aid going. Alameda County is not going to be fixing any leaks. They're going to be agency reps and mutual aid partners. They're going to be able to collect data. So in this room, when the EOC is activated, you'll be able to adequately prioritize based on the incident field data collected out in the field. We talked to your IT department. We asked them, what's the likelihood that we could transfer this to an electronic format? You could be collecting it live. He said, not a problem. We have all the capability within the resources that we have now. We said, you know what, he asked in our training, do you want me to start working on it? We said, you know what, we got to get several months and several thousand incidents and events under the belt of the folks that are using it, so they recognize that they're collecting the appropriate fields. This is based on me. I have 40 years of experience. You should be aware of, as a senior field battalion chief, San Jose is going to run 97,000 calls plus this year. They ran over almost 98,000 last year. I used a tactical worksheet on 100% of my incidents. Battalion 1 responded on about 3,000 calls a year. In 11 years of being at Battalion 1, I had 2 nights where I didn't get up. So it's incredibly busy. Is it a reasonable expectation for you to ask for a tactical worksheet to be filled out? Yes, if you want your folks to have a clear mind and a standard set of outcomes so that they will respond to a standard action, because the standard condition is an earthquake should be lots of water leaks. And if we're using it in the everyday, then we're not going to wait for an emergency to use a tactical worksheet. There was some rub with that. The payoff was that we looked at dozens of different forms that are currently used in the water district and tried to reduce them down into these 4 pages, taking your current policy, your current procedures, and including them on this document. So there was a leak report, a safety report, a whole bunch of different types of reports that are now collected in an ICS 201 tactical worksheet that we call the Alameda County Tactical Worksheet. So receiving the call and then forcing them into making a decision. because you have operating engineers number 3, that means you have a union, that means there's a chain of command that can either add to benefit or it can create roadblocks. I think that with good education and with good training and exercising, it actually adds to the flow of information, but we made it very clear to everyone involved, if you're the first one on the scene and you're representing the water district, the law says you are the incident commander. Whether you're utility worker 3 or whether you have 2 days on the job. And Steve has, an anecdotal story I hope that he'll share with the training that we had where we watched someone with basically less than 2 weeks on the job perform at the same level of someone with 32 years on the job with the demonstrated performance scenario-based training that we have.
Yeah, I was very impressed. Part of the training was we went around the room and we each had to play a role that we were the first person on the scene and utilize this form and fill it out and express out loud what we'd be communicating over a district handheld radio. And we had a gentleman in the training room, a new hire with the district. Was it, how long was he?
He'd been here like maybe less than just about 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
You couldn't tell the difference between somebody who had been with the district 2 weeks and somebody had been here for 20 years. That's how effective the training and utilization of this form was. So I was overwhelmed at the success.
And it's just taking what is an industry best practice. I fly a lot in my business, and I like the fact that the pilot and the co-pilot use a checklist every time before they take off. I kind of rely on them to do that. Even though if it's Southwest, all they fly is a 737, about 6 models of that airplane, but just that one style of airplane. And the fact that they just landed doesn't count for the fact they're going to go through the checklist again. A great read is Dr. Altu Gwande's book, The Checklist Manifesto, talks about highly reliable organizations and the utilization of checklists reduce errors exponentially. And again, me as an incident commander, from the time I got on the job in 1978, having a job aid, it's not a cheat sheet, it's actually an accuracy sheet. And it's a coaching sheet. And it's a prompting sheet. And we talk about coach for success and prompt for success. And the neat thing about it was we as the DMD supervisors as the coaches when we went around in the training, and they became the subject matter experts on the information that we knew that was critical to collect. So forcing them into a decision, getting there, arriving on scene, what they were going to do once they arrived on scene, what was going to be included in their initial on-scene report. This is the incident. We wanted them to simulate that they were taking in this information and then filling out step 3. And from that, these are what we would consider the critical factors of what is at risk, both in infrastructure with the district and in public safety and in worker safety. And then from that, they would have to be prepared. In this event, for the sake of the simulation, we said that the assisting and cooperating agencies that were already on scene told the Alameda County Water representatives, you know what, we got this, it's our situation, consider it our problem. And that was to force them into the very difficult situation of when you know you may possibly have Alameda County infrastructure, water district infrastructure involved, to first ask the question, okay, who's the incident commander here? And if they give you the dog look, then you say, you know what, we've got a tactical worksheet. I just have a few questions. I'm going to recommend that we do unified command. If the assisting and cooperating agencies say, you know what, that's not necessary, then we prompted them that that's when you want to immediately get on the phone, talk with your supervisor, get your map page up, you know what infrastructure you have at risk, and talk them through it. And hopefully we'll work on getting them to agree to a unified command. After they did the on-scene report, collected the critical factors, then we said you've got to be prepared to give a CAN report. Conditions, actions, and needs. So if you're a boss here and someone's out in the field, you should be able to easily ask them at any time, what's your CAN report on this? What's your conditions? Standardized way of recording that. What are your actions? What are you planning on doing? So it was 1978. I was 17 years old when I first got in the fire service. A plan. It's an organized sequence of events over a specified period of time in order to accomplish specific objectives. You should know that it's organized, it's sequential, it's specific, and it's objective-driven. And it's appropriate to ask what's your plan based on the CAN report, your conditions, actions, and needs. And again, laid out in the tactical worksheet. This is a way that we record where all our resources are. There's a lot of acronyms. That's the one thing about ICS. There's a lot of alphabet soup. You know, we're second only to the Department of Defense in being in love with acronyms. And so we have handbooks that actually are able to help out with those. We tried to reduce as many as we could and try to do things by circling and checking so that there was a minimum amount of writing at both the demand of the responder and of the folks that are recording the information. This is all the information that's included in the former ACWD safety checklist when they get on a job site. So this covers all of our initial tailgate safety issues for OSHA, that we've at least addressed them, and again, it's a job to prompt them to succeed for a standard outcome. And then this is a standardized map. Consider this as just blocks within a street or a particular intersection. And nationwide, we identify things as standing at and looking at the event. The side you're standing on looking at the event, that's the alpha or A side. To your left is the Bravo, to the back of that is the Charlie, to the right of that is the Delta. And because there's an expectation that you are going to do unified command, this is where you ask folks what agency they represent, what is their name, what is their cell phone number, and what is their email. And don't let them walk away without at least getting their name and their cell phone, because a boss should be able to call and ask, hey, who was that was here? I don't know, they just said it's ours and they drove away in their truck. And you're now left without any way of being able to contact them. So whether it's an event that is as difficult as the one that we had on Alvarado, where there was lots of continuous media attention, tweeting from the scene, continually providing news releases, and we've noticed that really enlightened and informed agencies have their own PIO. You guys have Shireen acting as that. And when we can push out as much information from our own district tweets, it was interesting, I was forwarding some stuff to Jake of what I was observing in Ventura County when the fire siege came around Ojai. The water district there was intimately aware about what was happening both at the watershed, the supply, the filtration, purification, and then distribution of that water, and was tweeting that information continually, both to the customers and to the emergency responders, because they knew that was the primary commodity that they were going to use to fight the fire. The fire service has been using incident command to amass resources in a very organized way, using standard terminology. We have a unity of command, we have a span of control, and it is something that we basically borrowed as a best practice from both industry and from the Department of Defense. What's interesting is this is one of two of PG&E's incident bases from the North Fires. They didn't used to respond this way. What do you think the catastrophic opportunity of change was for them? It was the San Bruno incident. And they now are hiring folks from public safety to be their agency rep and their liaison, so that they are starting to learn as a corporate culture the way to deploy, just like both the military and the fire service. So these are refrigerator trucks, that's the chow hall. These are sleeper trucks. They're not paying for hotels and motels. They're sleeping people. You can put 20 people per these. And then they amass their resources based on type and kind in the resource typing. You guys have the good fortune that Jake's predecessor, Steve Dennis, is known throughout the industry in terms of establishing plans of excellence and was pivotal in resource typing water resources for NIMS, SIMS, and ICS. So we already are able to categorize the hardware and the iron and the equipment that you have both in your warehouse and in your fleet into a standardized deployment method. I don't want to get ahead of myself there. So that's how we utilize ICS, and we believe that people who do things every day learn them as a common practice. They create neural pathways that habituate a response. Robert being in charge of DMD, working through his supervisors who both collect, review, and critique the tactical worksheets and refine them and change them as they find a better way to do the work, is the way to precondition our folks that when we do have that disaster, whether it's localized to the district specifically, or whether the district has a disaster of which there are one of many agencies asking for mutual aid resources, and there tends to be further and further drawdown of resources as disasters become more widespread. Those agencies that are both trained, prepared, and compliant typically get the resources first and typically get the reimbursement first. And this is the way to lay the foundation. So not only does it make for good emergency response to create standard actions to standard conditions, you can also have an expectation of both fiscal responsibility and legal protection so that the People's Water District is both well prepared, well trained, and well resourced to be able to respond either within the district or as a mutual aid partner to any of the assisting and cooperating agencies around them. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Where you emphasize the standardization initiative of the emergency response. Has not 201 form been standardized? And whoever standardized it also digitized it?
The standardized 201 form is absolutely blank and is not incident specific or resource specific.
So you consider that to be a job to be done by the emergency preparedness people?
Well, that document includes, the one that says the Alameda County Tactical Worksheet, includes 100% of the information that someone would either have to hand type or hand write in that tool.
I'm fully supportive of the
Right.
document. I'm dismayed that this organization, which has been working on it for a long while, doesn't have it established now. It's a failure.
I would venture to say,
At the state or federal level.
I think that you guys are on the absolute leading edge. I don't think another water district has a standardized. Jim Wolbring, San Jose Water Company, his comment to me was, he came in and observed, and we had folks from East Bay Mud as well. They said in all the training, Wolbring's got 30 some odd years in the industry as well, said, I have never seen ICS taken and flipped over. He goes, we almost always get the federal form and we're told, you fill it out based on what we need. And he says, you've taken our everyday and made it so it answers all the questions. So
I think you've hit the point that the concern I have with our emphasis on NIMS and SIMS. We have an upward reporting system. And that's a reporting system. It discusses very little how you employ. You allocate resources. You don't manage resources. Because management involves employment. That element has been missing and even the reporting elements, from the national system. And I believe, and it's the concern I have within our own district, that we have not identified it as a district-wide responsibility and the employment criteria for that. You had one example you showed us, which was a Union Sanitary District problem. We were an ancillary player in that. But it fully taxed our resources. for a period of time. We had no other additional capabilities at that time, and we really didn't have something set up to be able to handle those additional challenges that came. And in fact, even on this, I believe we should have been looking at outside resources to address some of it, and we never employed that element. We didn't get the practice, and I had an opportunity that could have been done. So just part rhetorical, but...
Oh, I'm in agreement with you that in working with field staff at the lowest possible level, there is both a really bright side and a shadow side. I think that you guys should be proud of how fiscally prudent your culture of fiscal prudence is all the way down to the UW1. Operating on a just-in-time fiscal prudent deployment without having the equivalent of DEFCON levels of what are our thresholds of when we ask for help. You can often be chasing that. To teach people what is the standardized method for recording and reporting, now that we have a standardized method of recording and reporting, it's much easier today for a manager in the Alameda County Water District to look at that and say, we've reached a critical threshold, we're at drawdown, we're now at a place that we need to ask for mutual aid sooner.
Let me just share with you. My experience is somewhat dated, but I was a civil engineer in the Air Force, worked at the air staff level, and even with the coordination of the Joint Chiefs of J. Triple Nickel, disaster preparedness and response. Augmentee, the Air Force Fire Marshal for several years, 13,000 firefighters around the world, 162 locations, seats on NFPA 408, 415. So have DOD and disaster preparedness, as well as fire protection. So those areas, it comes really hard solely that when we look at this as an organization, there are three types of engineering: O&M, capital construction, and contingency. We don't have, I would argue that there are few, even in this room, that have a real understanding of what contingency engineering is and should be. So that's
That's a perfect segue to our next speaker, because he's going to be talking about when you've made those decisions as a policy directive and you've given the GM direction as to what are your critical thresholds so that you can have an expectation that he's going to be asking you for authorization to go outside, what is going to be standing. It then falls into Don's shop about what is available to you at either low cost or reimbursement as a assisting and cooperating agency just for those thresholds when you've met them.
I'll add one more comment, and at risk of figure offline. But there's even a misunderstanding of what our job is in an emergency. It's not to provide potable water. That's the county health department. Fire flows, sanitary flows. Getting that message through has been a challenge. And it's not a question of deployment of resources. It's how we manage and balance and support resources, because some only limited by our ability to support the huge resource space that can come into us, and then the ability to document it so we'll get reimbursed.
I love that you're saying it, because it's almost as though you read Jake's agenda, because that really speaks to the last guest speaker about information flow and information management in terms of both customer expectation and regulatory expectation about what is our mandate and what are our desires. Thank you.
And I'd just like to interrupt for a moment talking about the last speaker, Miss Marty Boyer. Will you raise your hand? And I just wanted to introduce you to Jake. Jake, Marty.
Hello?
My bestie friend.
Yes.
Okay.
You want to take a break first?
It's the board, the leadership,
We're going to take a break.
the formalities for workshop.
We'll take 5 or 10 minutes, real quick break. What would you like to, when was the next opportunity for a break?
Let's probably go there about an hour before the next break, 45 minutes.
I'm seeing people get up, so I think we want to find
Yeah.
right? So maybe,
be the bad guy to get everybody to see, and I got to get everybody to pay attention. Moving forward, we talked about the instant command system, and now we'll talk about the standardized emergency management system, and hand it over to Don Bullen, who knows a thing or two about that system. SIMS. SIMS is intended to standardize response to emergencies involving multiple jurisdictions or multiple agencies. SIMS is intended to be flexible and adaptable to the needs of all emergency responses in California. So, there's many ways to define SIMS, but ultimately it's the use of all our systems within the state of California. For the California Emergency Services Act, it states the use of SIMS, the use of the instant command system here within our district, the multi-agency coordination system, mutual aid agreements, the operational area of our county, and the state. So our district does belong to a multi-agency coordination group, or Bay Area Water MAC, and that consists of East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Water District, SFPUC, and ourselves. This water MAC generally is used just during the preparedness phase, where we'll meet up a few times a year to discuss all kinds of things, to include policies, procedures, operational guidelines, etc. By doctrine, you should be able to use this in response phase, and thought about for a hot second during the Sonoma Fire Complex, but we need to do much more training before we can activate a water MAC to take on all the responsibilities that requires. Operational area, you'll hear that term a lot, just means our county. And within our county, how that relates to us, we belong to Alameda County. Our county said to the Sheriff's Office, here, the Office of Emergency Services is yours. So the Alameda County Sheriff's Office, Office of Emergency Services is our office area. I think we're fortunate. There's plenty of reasons why we're fortunate, but it's a very active Office of Emergency Services. Mainly due to, go ahead, Director.
Just going back to Bay Area Water MAC, how old is that partnership, and what coordination has gone on in terms of like emergency response?
I have to get how old our partnership is. I have the charter on my desk. I just don't recall the last time it was updated. But my predecessor got our district involved in that partnership, so we've been part of the Bay Area Water MAC for quite some time. And during the preparedness phase, we're active. The response phase, I haven't seen it activated, and I don't think it's been activated. It would take a significant event, probably more so than the Sonoma Fire Complex, where so many utilities are inundated, that ultimately you just say, hey, where are the USC going to be just for water utilities? Okay, and then regionally, our utilities are going to get together, all the representatives, and help coordinate this response. And I don't think that's happened, but it's in the doctrine.
Just to add
And Don, feel free to elaborate as well with other MACs.
Just to add to what Jake said regarding the MAC, we did have a joint meeting, I want to say about 9 months ago. It was hosted by East Bay Mud. Typically, what happens is there are different directors in an EOC. You've got the director, operations chief, logistics, finance, and planning. And so at the MAC group level, the counterparts from the different agencies will meet. So as an example, Contra Costa might host through the MAC group all the operations section chiefs. So they come together, they talk about their common interests, organizations, needs, and so forth. So those are meetings that happen not so formally, because it'd be typically like Dan Stevenson saying, okay, let's meet. They're informal. I want to know who my counterpart is and another Bay Area agency that belongs to the MAC group. So we have a network, a line of communication, and they talk shop with respect to emergency response. So typically those things happen. There's some sort of MAC-related meeting taking place in the Bay Area on a quarterly basis.
you have anything on that?
Macs are primarily used for planning, decision-making, not response. Response will be in your protocols and then in your mutual aid packs, the evolution up through coastal and the state. But before that ever happens, you all need to be on the same page, knowing the same people operating under the same practices.
Back to our operational area, where I left off, our Alameda County Sheriff's Office does host our Office of Emergency Services for the county. Due to all the civil unrest and emergencies within our county, it's an active, very ready department, or I should say office. And I think we're lucky to be within this particular operational area. They have 3 full-time non-sworn staff and 3 full-time sworn staff, which is a deputy, lieutenant, and a captain. They're responsible for all the jurisdictions within the county. So they come into play our multi-jurisdictional events like that search and recovery along the creek last year. When a lot of coordination needs to take place, and we need to designate who the commander is. They also host the Urban Area Security Initiative, which is a 9-county initiative. It's grant funded. And the UWAC, or UWASI, as we refer to the Urban Area Security Initiative, basically it's just another organization out there that is a big help with preparedness. They provide a lot of grants to help provide local jurisdictions with equipment and supplies. They also provide regional training, the training that I hosted here. Last year was through UWASI request. It was free training. And they're pretty famous for their exercises, in particular Urban Shield that happens every year. UWASI is the person who manages that exercise behind the scenes. They also host other exercises to include search and rescue, mass shelter, and CPOP. All right, this picture here is me and DJ from Alameda County Office of Emergency Services. This one beat my chest. Look at me. Picture here. What this is going back to is that slide where I had all the organizations we belong to. And what I wanted to show was that through our participation with these organizations, include Alameda County Emergency Managers Association, you know, I built these relationships, and our peers within our district have built these relationships that have really been beneficial. And this is both of us, me as the logistics section chief and him as the emergency coordinator and Sonoma's EOC. And when we met, you know, we were able to hit the ground running. We already had that cohesion, that trust, and we were able to be quite effective. And Sonoma was grateful for it. And then state. The California Office of Emergency Services, there's 2 particular areas that relate to our district. There's a Coastal Regional Emergency Operations Center in Walnut Creek. It's an operational center by name, but generally it's staffed around 4 people and who are very dynamic and helpful people. It's just they have a lot of responsibility. Their responsibility is all the way from Warren, Oregon, down to Monterey, Eastern and Diablo Mountains. And they play a role in preparedness and response, and I see their role as mainly as subject matter experts and liaisons is the best way to put it, where they liaison with the operational areas. And then Cal ES headquarters in Sacramento, that's huge, it's enormous. I work with them through the National Guard. It's a big facility that's staffed in the preparedness areas, response and recovery areas. And they have a state operations center that is only activated during emergencies, but years like last year, I think it was activated like the whole year. It's just, you know, between all the emergencies in the state of California. What's that?
We just closed it 2 days ago after the Thomas mudslide.
Nice. So yeah, it's amazing what they're doing up there, and they're still responsive to me. I still have to call them on behalf of the district for our public assistance efforts, and they're very responsive. There's a lot of good people involved in that organization. And within the SOC, it can get a little confusing using all these terms and whatnot and acronyms, but there is a Utility Operations Center, which is a room, a very important room within the State Operations Center, and it covers the utility coordination response for the entire state, all utilities. So it's just a small slice of responsibility. Here's a picture when I was back, one of my activations, might have been the last one, the National Guard. My role in the National Guard is the Deputy Chief for Logistics for the state. And often I'm liaison over in Cal OES to see how we can support our troops. At this point, we activate 2,500 troops, or the locals. And so when I was there, it's kind of hard to put things into words sometimes. And this was a significant event. I thought I'd take a picture. One, this is our Emergency Operations Center, right? This is there, no steroids. It's enormous. The screen here has got to be, I think it's like 2 stories tall.
Yep, 55 feet wide, 28 feet tall.
55 feet wide, 28 feet tall. And this little area over here, that's the Utility Operations Center, and that's where the mutual aid response for utilities takes place in California. With that said, I'll go ahead and introduce Don Bolin with my body's over here.
You can tell the value of responsibility by its real estate proximity to that floor. And the fact that utility is a front and 1 row in shows you that the governor considers that high-value asset, high-value resource with direct access to what's going on. Because there are some that are in wings down the hallway that don't see that room.
Or are remote.
Or off-site.
Have to be off-site.
So Don Bolin, Executive Director of California Utilities Emergency Association, is currently, he belongs to the CUA, the oldest and largest emergency utility association in California. His position encompasses providing technical, tactical, and strategic directions for the membership. As the Executive Director, he serves as a single point of contact for the critical infrastructure utilities and the State of California Emergency Management Agency, along with other government agencies before, during, and after an event to facilitate communications, coordination, and emergency response. Mr. Bolin chairs the Utilities Operations Center, part of the State Operations Center. And for a few seconds, Don, just thank you personally. When I found out I received a job at this water district, I started doing my homework. I started talking to people. I said, all right, well, this looks like I got some work cut out for me. Anybody got any advice with utilities? And about 100% of what I got from the operations director in Cal OES, logistics director in Cal OES, is you got to talk to Don Bolin. So anyways, he's took me under his wing, giving some advice through one emergency after another, and he's a huge asset to our state. Leave it at that. Without further ado, it's all yours, Don.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I greatly appreciate you affording me the opportunity. And in fact, on a very personal note, I like being here on a social endeavor because normally when you talk to me, everything has gone south, and it's gone way south. And it's in the scope of issues that overwhelm most people, including the professionals. My background to support what I do, as Kevin, I was a fire chief for 29 years, a volunteer department on the west side of Chicago. So yes, I fought fires in 20 below zero weather, where every piece of our equipment froze to the street and we had to use blowers to get it out. I am a combat veteran from Vietnam. We'll leave that one go. And my last job before joining CUEA was the Senior Vice President, National Security, Emergency Preparedness, AT&T's 50 states and 23 foreign countries. I have served time in Hurricane Andrew. I've been at the World Trade Center, the Mora building, and I headed up our national response for 11 and a half months to Katrina. I do have an ounce of background and experience in disaster management. I couldn't fly an airplane. I probably couldn't fuel an oil tanker. When it comes to disasters, I have lived and died them from Vietnam till now. So with that being said, we will, let's see. If I put my glasses on, forgive me for age. It has finally caught up with me. And she's loading the PowerPoint. Oh, security alert, I'm not allowed. And I'm on the governor's cyber team.
Is that your first pick?
Yes, that's the opening pick, addressing you folks. We were created in 1952 at the request of the governor, just so that you know. The governor, in fact, by all characteristics, does not have purview or jurisdiction over investor-owned or most of the utilities. Utilities such as AT&T, Verizon, PG&E are outside of that, and that governor in 52 opted that he wanted to be able to have a line of communication as to what was going on, why it was going on, and how it was going to integrate with the state. We focus on mutual assistance. That is one of our backbones. How do we bring together the parties that are going to be accountable for responding and supporting all of our utilities in a disaster, whether it's large or small? We also are an integrated partnership between the government. Our offices are down the hall from Mark Ghirarducci in the executive wing of OES, sponsored by the state of California. State of California does not have embedded a utility division. That utility branch falls on us to execute because we can bring the players that are government. We represent DWR. We can bring investor-owned like PG&E, municipals like East Bay Mud, special districts, or private operators. I don't care in the sandbox who we represent. It's our unified mission to bring everybody together so that you have the resources you need to respond. Does anybody here in this room know how many residents we respond to? CUEA serves 96% of the population of the state of California, which now exceeds 34.5 million. We are the link for state and federal between all 8 critical infrastructures. And as you can see, electric has a critical role in everything you're going to do on a response, as does telecom and STATA. We also take a long, hard look at our potable water and our wastewater. We're going through this in Monticello. We're going through it in Santa Barbara. I'm going through it in Summerland as we speak right now, with their reservoirs being drained, their fresh waters being compromised, and their sewer lines being completely removed across 2 ravines down there that dump sewerage into the mudslide. Understanding that the private sector owns and operates the majority of the critical infrastructure in the country. Preponderance of that is power. By the way, CUEA has crews in Puerto Rico from several of our utilities right now. The state and federal government supports what the critical infrastructure for the nation needs to operate. We serve as the legal point of contact for critical infrastructure and OES, facilitate communications, which is critical. If you don't have clear, concise communications, you will never get to close the end task of the mission. And as Kevin alluded to earlier, and Jake's alluded to, because he did invite me here this evening, so I did come from the Capitol, you need a PIO. And you really and truly, I can't tell you how many times in the private and public sector, you need that PIO to get out in front of whatever's going on. People are hungry for answers, and in the vacuum of a PIO, they will create answers that you can't undo. I can promise you that. California's Utility Emergency Association is the only legally recognized critical infrastructure utility association, power, telecom, gas, water, wastewater, or California Office of Emergency Services and the Governor's Office. How do we get notified? We get constantly notified. This thing goes off like a baby's rattling a crib when they're hungry. Warning Center. We're on all of the dialogic systems for the California Warning Center. We then will notify the utility agencies throughout the state of California what that impact call-up or notification is. We have a memorandum of understanding which is binding and now perpetual. Since Matt Bentenhausen was there, I used to work for him when he was my governor. He was the OES OEM for California prior to Mark taking the office, and we signed a perpetual at that time. We also, in the small print down here in the bottom, for those that are regulated by the CUPC, which you are not, fortunately, are the agent that interfaces between OES and the CUPC in behalf of utilities. To you, that's not a lot. To the CUPC, the State Emergency Plan, the executive branch. We are in statute. We're in 13 statutes. That was one of my missions when I came on board 11 and a half years ago. I did not want CUEA to move on and then be ancillary to the state process. So I have spent a lot of time and energy in the Capitol with a lot of senators making sure that we were in there. We report with Mark to the governor on critical infrastructure on the governor's executive continuity team by state statute. So I can pass on, the organization can transit, we are there, we're embedded, we're in law. This is that same sock that Jake took a look at. This is where I live, 16 to 18 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. If you will notice on this spot right here, that's my ugly frame up there getting ready to brief the entire State Operations Center on the status of where the critical infrastructure was at, what's out of service, what's going to be restored, how we can restore it, and what the impact to the state of California and the federal government will be. This is when we're out there with the SOC activated. As you can see, when our UOC is activated, you can't get enough oxygen in a room. This UOC is designed like your dining room table. There are 4 critical positions in this UOC. We have energy, telecommunications, water, wastewater, gas, and gas pipeline. Those are the 4 core positions in this UOC every time. From that, we will expand on the disaster's need. If it's a power, if it's a fire, if it's a mudslide, we will ramp up and we will ramp down. And this is where your organization becomes critical. If you cannot provide manpower to mutual aid, we may request you provide a person to the UOC as an SME for water or wastewater. It's always a concern if you don't have enough force, can you provide, Jake or someone else, to actually physically staff the UOC. Now, how do we do this? Here's our operational flow when we actually show up. We have a staff of trained about 76 right now. I'm starting on another training mission in a couple of weeks in San Diego to expand those that are staffing the UOC. And as Kevin said, we have a punch list. Any individual can sit down in that seat. You need to know nothing about what we're doing. We have that bucket list, box A, box B. You are able to step up. What we do ask is that you know your discipline. We do not ask for your logo. We do not ask your company. What we do ask is you understand your industry. We have REOCs, Regional Operations Center, the Walnut Creek. There's Los Alamitas down south, and there's Richards up north. They have a core staff of planning personnel. Response personnel in disasters are folded over to the State Operations Center. As you can see, we represent the entire gamut. We also work with General Baldwin, who Jake knows very well, and the General and I know each other personally and professionally. And they provide guard personnel to our UOC because in the Tubbs fire up here, we were using National Guard helicopters, National Guard spotters, we were using the Predator drones, we were getting downloads and Mylars out of those via the National Guard on the Civil Support Task Force, which was in fact engaged by the General and myself talking to Mark and Ken Pimlott from Fire. This is how the operation flows. If the state's not activated, you as a district can request us as your association to stand up the Utility Operations Center to support you without the State Operations Center being activated if you need that level of support. Now, they have a tendency to pull that big red trigger in the lobby all the time, and the state becomes operational. About 9 months last year, about 13 weeks already this year. When that happens, we then have the REAC report to the state, and then we report up through the operations. Interdependencies, you have 3 seconds, you know what that is, and we can move on. Understanding interdependencies. This is critical. How much do you rely on power, on natural gas, on SCADAs, telecoms, and wireless? What do you rely beyond your control? And that's a critical asset. We can have a hospital that has standby generation 82 degrees and we shut the sanitation off and it must be evacuated. So there's a lot of other things other than just what we're doing in our purview that can have short and long-term impact on your water district. Understanding cascading functions, what are the mitigation and backup steps, who is available to call and when. We have master mutual assistance agreements for electric and natural gas. Every power company, 42 of them in California, is signatory to this. Every gas company is signatory. We have a mutual assistance agreement for water and wastewater. Our members in the association are signatories to it. We have dozens and dozens of LADWP, MDW, East Bay Mud, and yourselves. There are over 1,003 licensed water operating providers. I was on the drought task force for 4 years. Some only have 2 clients, but they're legally registered with the state. Types of mutual assistance requests you may have to envision if you need it. Do you need crews and equipments, waivers, escorts, and access? The number one issue right now is trying to get people in to do your assessments through a roadblock. When we had the Tubbs fire up here in Santa Rosa and up in Napa, one of the issues they had is SFPUC put 78 patrol units into that area. People showing up, the patrol units were out of SFPUC. They had no knowledge of who you were, why you were there, what the mutual aid was all about. We have a system where I have an embedded CHP officer in our UOC liaison that can clear those within minutes. The crews, as you can see, we can get you everything from backhoes to dumps to aerial. Material. We have material scattered all the way from the Oregon line down to Calexico. We have 2 form requests. Understanding you may have a disaster, a major water main break, a sinkhole, whichever hits you, you may have an inquiry only. We have a whole mechanism for sending that out to all of our water providers. Do not respond, but please let Alameda know in our yard sits so many valves, so many backholes. So doesn't mean you need them, but your comfort zone is you know they're there. When you decide to pull the trigger for mutual assistance, we go to the red form. It goes to all the mutual assistance. I pulled that trigger down in Summerlin, in Santa Barbara, Metropolitan Water District, and LADWP stepped up with over 200 people. Fabricators, welders, pipes, trucks, backhoes, in a matter of 4 hours.
And just to add to what Don's saying, I personally get emails through him, through his agency, for material requests. Could be steel pipe, do we have any in stock? So it's very effective. Jake also gets the same emails.
We have a website that lists about everything that you need. As a agency member, you can get a password, and then you can go into all the minutes, the confidential, the contacts, everything, operating procedures for the UOC, call-outs. We post on the web when the UOC is active, and in fact, we've made it so much easier. We have a master and rollover number in the UOC, and we've got an OEF address for the UOC. So we have a separate inbox that comes in that anybody's in the UOC can see. And then we break it by water, gas, telecom, but they all are hosted and come in here. I will be there, my designated director, and we will always have staff there for you. We also provide speakers, trainings, and conferences. As you can see in the top left, I was addressing the federal FEMA conference. We hosted a conference down in the Queen Mary. On the lower left hand, I was doing the SHIELD exercise, and on the right hand, we were doing ICS TEX training. Here's your representation, and the key on the top is the most important one to you today. I am the only person, and we are the only association, and I repeat that, only the governor has appointed to the California Task Force on the Fuel Set-Aside and Allocation Program. Every other group is a government group that the governor can control. He came out and said, now wait a minute, I can't control gas and electric and water, telecom. We better call Don and put him on this. What does this mean to you? This means under the Fuel Set-Aside Program, the governor enacts it, the refinery is ordered to hold such a percentage of their refined product. That product is then moved by the California Energy Commission to a distribution capability. That capability is given to the mission tasking desk in OES solely. They procure it, we distribute it. All utilities requesting fuel in a catastrophic event will go through the CUEA UOC. I have embedded in there the fuel specialist from the California Energy Commission. I have embedded in there the Army Corps of Engineers for temporary power. We have two majors colonels embedded in the UOC. And I have a DOT specialist in our Utility Operations Center supporting it. So if you have exhausted your contracts for fuels, then you will call the state and say, listen, ABC provider hit the tank farm and we can't get any fuel. We can then mission task to make sure that you get fuel. And that's over and above anybody else in the state. We're taking a look. We just got into the HEMETs, which the Guard has, and retrofitted every HEMET for the spigots, so instead of filling helicopters and Humvees, they can fill private and commercial response vehicles, fire engines, bucket trucks, backhoes. We went ahead, they're about $3,000 a kit. We got 58 of them, and we're going to ask the Title 12 full-time Army to put those in place also. As you can see on line 2, you've heard an awful lot about California Standard Emergency Management System. The governor, under Governor Schwarzenegger, appointed me to that board 8 years ago. We sit on that and review all changes, updates, policy, implementations, and either approve them or send them back to committee. We do this twice a year under the leadership of the governor, sponsored by Mark. There's 18 of us on that committee. I am also on the Cybersecurity Leadership Committee. We have a cyber response team in CUEA, which is exceptionally efficient. We're on the alert and warning, and of course we're involved in all the CAT plans. We are also the lead for EF12. EF12 in this room may not mean a lot, but EF12 supports ESF12. That is all utilities under FEMA in the state of California are EF12, and then at the national level it's called ESF12. That's our crosswalk between federal and state. So I talk to DOE on a regular basis. Here's a couple of those little things that you were discussing earlier. What happens when everything goes south and you have to call for help? We had tower replacements. We had a slight leak in Oroville. And after we evacuated 188,000 people, PWR turned around and PG&E and dismantled all of their 230 kV towers because they were in the spillway erosion zone. After we dismantled them and moved them all out, Mr. Croyle decided that we're going to rebuild the spillway and we didn't need to evacuate everybody, so let's turn the power grid back up. By the way, in the bottom of Oroville Dam, happens to be their hydro generation station, and we had nothing to link it to the grid with. So now we went backwards, starting to play Legos and rebuild the infrastructure we had just spent a week and a half tearing down. Something you don't see behind Oroville. Those that were involved knew how bad Feather River was in Maryville, right? Most people are not aware that we shut off Kinder Morgan's gas pipeline at the railroad trestle. Gas cannot be stored. Gas is shipped on a 6-day cycle. Refinery ships regular gasoline, then they ship diesel, then they ship avgas, and they go back to the cycle. They were pushing regular gas when we shut off the pipeline in the evacuation. This backed it up into the Chino yards. We were a half a day away from shutting the refineries down because we had nowhere to push the gas. Critical component when we talk about interdependencies and cooperation. We needed to get people in with the excavators to clear the debris off the line in Feather River. We did it with 2 engine rescue companies, 2 CHP vehicles sitting and running. We timed it. If that breach gave way, we had 6 minutes to get out, 7.5 minutes the water would have hit. Critical component when you look at what do you do downstream that you don't see on the surface. We also had our cell coverage, we had the gas grid, and other support. Behind the scenes, what hit us? We needed to get our gas shipments for chlorine out of Stockton, and we couldn't get them because the chlorine provider was in Sparks. We needed CHP control over the mountains. Utility trucks and convoys will be waived, no questions asked. Now, let me quantify this. You need to have a logoed vehicle, and your employee needs a picture ID card. Just like I carry for this, they'll be waved through as soon as I make the request. Contractors are another challenge. If you bring in third-party contractors, Aldridge Electric, Davy Tree, we need to know who, the picture, the vehicle, the license number, and the roadblock. Most often you will find they are fuel providers, predominantly on cell sites and fixed sites, but it could be any of your pumping stations that needs it. We had all kinds of equipment that we sent up to move wastewater because we had the big EPA issue, pumping wastewater out. You need a permit, you need to know where to dump it, you need to know what roads you're allowed to travel, and then of course everybody was short phones, so we asked AT&T to give out several thousand phones that were considered disposable. Activated them in the local area code, handed them to the customer and said, here, you got them. When you're done using them, we'll shut them off, throw them in the garbage can. We had a slight issue in Valley and Butte, which you may or may not have been aware of. 437 formal requests we received for assistance in that 11-day period. 39 dealt with the CHP. PG&E lost 2,000 poles and deployed 800 employees. We had 13 colts, cows, and arms unit, and now add to this, we have just added last week our drone cellulars. There are cellular drones. We can lock at 1,000 feet, and we don't have to worry about driving into the area anymore. These are the water companies that we responded to and the kind of assistance that we provided while we were up there, and the kind of companies that did provide it, including we lost our geothermals. We undertook also the single largest assistance response in California history. This was ugly for me. I was asked to visit with Mr. Brown before we could do this because he did not want us to strip California of our ability to respond in a catastrophic earthquake. And after I provided him our assurances, he was so polite to look at me and said, it's on your back. And those are the kind of things you really don't want to hear. On the 26th, we opened it. You can see 41 of our power companies stood up. 1,800 personnel were amassed in 3 days. 1,000 vehicles were involved. On the 30th, I was called by President Obama, Secretary Chu, and the FEMA administrator. Their request from California was 20,000 power technicians. We don't have 20,000 power. But the perception of the size of California is we did. One question was asked of me. I had 3 people in the office. What can we do to expedite help? And I said, we need air assets. I will never ask for air assets again. Never. I got 132 C5s and C17s from General Schaefer. And he said, they're on their way. Where are you going to put them? What do you need to put on them? They're up to you. I had them in Portland. I had them in Travis. I had them in March. I had them in Luke in Arizona. I had no idea that they couldn't haul private assets. Private assets cannot have any oxygen or any fuel. They must be completely steamed and stripped. And their units are designed to haul combat equipment, not private sector equipment. This airlift for CUEA only cost $34.4 million. That's what they gave me. Here you go. Number one obstacle to that, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't send any loadmasters. I had these great big planes and lined up of trucks and no loadmasters. Back in 2010, if you want to look at mutual aid and the size of the deployment, we had a January storm for PG&E that started with Pacific Corps on Oregon, came all the way down into Willows, shut everything. We had to have graders and dozers assigned to us by Caltrans. They assigned 30 of them to escort our out-of-town crews. We brought in 8,000 people. When you talk about, and as Kevin alluded to, PG&E's base camp, when you have to house 8,000 people, this was Weed, California, our first stopping point. We put 240 vehicles in their fairground and had nowhere else to put them. We actually opened 11 fairgrounds like that just to stage our equipment. Mutual assistance, how do we work with CHP and government agencies? We had a major power outage down in San Jose area. These are Sempra trucks coming out of San Diego. We had 112 crews, 48 vehicles traveling 516 miles uninterrupted. Why was that important? Because every mom and pop food store has a health advisory. If they don't have power after so many hours, you must throw all of your food away that's refrigerated. We made it there 4 hours before that deadline hit. To the community that owned the meat market and the Safeway and the Rayleighs, this was a 5-division CHP escort through LA in the HOV lanes at 7:10 in the morning. Talk about irate people. We got a lot of comments on it, but it got here. My parting thoughts: the value of water and the critical water interdependencies are not well understood in this state or in this nation in any capacity. Water sector communities must make resilient. The impacts of water can be achieved through a reasonable raising of the awareness. Your ability to pre-plan for disasters, your emergency management group, knowing what you have, what you need to have, and who can come and help you or who you can help is critical. I do this on a national basis. I've done this in Washington, in Texas. The fact is, people understand power. It's visible, that light switch goes off, everybody's irate. It's like cable TV. When it goes snow on the screen, we're in a panic. Telecommunications is highly versatile right now. You can move them from drones, satellites, Colts. The fixed legacy systems are not as critical as they were. There is no way a community can put an 18-wheel tractor on a reservoir and drag it down the street. Your embedded infrastructure is where it is and how to deal with it. And the community as a whole, as was alluded to earlier, when they turn that spigot on, their expectation is water flows. And if it doesn't, the average person, the average community does not know where to go to resolve the issue. And it starts with the resident's call and it comes to you. But how big is the issue? How deep is the issue? all emergencies are local, but they're going to grow rapidly. If people can't use their commode, they can't drink their water, you better believe they have a propensity, as Oprah did, to call the governor, who calls us and says, you're not moving the mud out of orange grove. Well, no, we're not. It's over Highway 101. We're working on it. So one thing we need to understand is we need to enlighten, educate, expound on what the water district does, where it fits, and really how critical is it to the process. Because it really is. Hospitals have adopted a policy where every hospital must have a generator that can run for 2 days. It must have a guaranteed fuel supply. That's in part of the hospital rules in California. Nothing in a hospital addresses water or wastewater. If you cut the city water system off in the hospital, what good's the generator? Critical component, just my thoughts. Resilience communities are the design of the future. We must ensure that water sector is included in all future planning. And with that, I'll get down off my horse and I will give it back to you folks. Thank you for the time and the opportunity. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just send me back to the captain? In this afternoon's traffic, no less. There is not going to be a fast or easy way out of here, I find.
You and I will be waiting at each other on
Yeah. Comments, questions, folks? We are your association. We are here to help and support you, from the smallest to the largest. Take advantage of it.
Don, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm aware that East Bay Mud
Yeah.
has a mutual agreement with Los Angeles Water and Power.
Yeah, and Las Vegas Valley Water.
So in that kind of situation, do they, in a major disaster, or say there's a 8.0 earthquake centered in Oakland, do they call Las Vegas, Los Angeles first, or they call you?
They'll call us.
Okay.
We will send it out to everybody in the state. They also have the ability to execute private contracts, which is what they've done. There are 3 water companies the size of East Bay Mud. LADWP, Vince has that. We've got Las Vegas Valley and Portland, the city up. One of the things we all have to look at when you're making your preparedness plans is you need to run vertically up and down the state of California. You need to go from the Canadian border to Mexico, Oregon, and Washington. Your ability to reach east, once you get past Las Vegas, you've got 1,600 miles of small mom-and-pop utilities, power, water, before you can reach the Midwest, like a Rockford or Chicago or Springfield, that can give you 100 people and 100 dump trucks. Everybody else will give you 1 operator and 1 truck. The nightmare in compiling a list of, I have 1 operator, I have 1 truck, I need EPA permits, I need air resources permit, I need DOT waivers for 1 driver and 1 truck, the disaster will be over. It really will. It's a nightmare. I'm doing this right now, moving all of our equipment to Fort Lauderdale, putting it on a barge, and sending it to Puerto Rico. We have to go through 14 states with 14 different DOT standards, 14 different environmental weights, controls, and state DOT is controlled by state governors. There is no federal standard except for the one we were instrumental in designing, which is Title 49. That title says we don't have restrictions for hours for operators after safety. That's the only federal DOT standard that's uniform. All the rest are by states.
So if we don't have a similar mutual agreement with a counterpart in a distant part of the state, and we call you, is the response going to be significantly different than if we did have a mutual agreement in place?
In fact, what I will do, and let's just use LADWP, Vince and Lisa. If you called me and said, we need this and this and this, I send it out, Lisa Hayes tells me, hey, Don, I got 14 welders, 5 fabricators, 10 trucks, I can have them on the road in 2 hours. They're coming. Now, you can cut a separate deal with LADWP between Alameda and LADWP. Here's going to be the roadblock to implementing that. You don't have state escorts, you don't have Caltrans waivers, you don't have DOT waivers, you don't have Air Resources Board. When you go through us, we have all of those already in the queue to either go to Mark, or go to the governor, or go to the chief of the Air Resources Board, or to Pickett in charge of the Energy Commission. So we have already pre-scripted, hey, I've got 15 trucks coming out of LA, they're coming up here to Alameda, they need escorts, they need waivers, pass the scale, they're going. If you write a private agreement with LA, then you're going to have to execute those. And Steve knows this, and so does his boss. If we're bringing in Vegas on a private agreement, then it's like any other trucking company. They will comply with hours, they will comply with weight, they will comply with scales. His concern when they executed this is that his surrounding community, SFPUC, yourself, Sonoma, all the rest, didn't have the depth East Bay mud may need in a catastrophic incident. They wanted a security blanket that says, we're signing this one and we're signing it, and that's to their credit. They're making sure they have more than a single point, a second point, now they're even looking at a third point. They're a gravity-fed system, so looking at how they're going to operate in a catastrophic failure is going to be exceptionally complex. But they do have 2 private agreements. I've seen them. I've read them. I've been involved in them. So, and if they decide to execute them through us, then all the waivers and stuff that we've had pre-queued, we're just going to involve. My issue is to see that you get what you need as fast as you can get it. Time is of the essence. When your PIO is standing before a camera, they don't want to say, well, in about 18 hours, I'll have a crew here to dig. One of the things I learned as a senior vice president for AT&T, removed from this entirely, was brand image. My CEO, Mr. Whitaker, believed in brand image at all costs. He did not want a Tylenol on his record. Get out in front of it. Be honest with the public. Don't give them unreal expectations. I did it. I had a PIO in the fire service. I didn't want a firefighter or an engineer or a medic on the street telling us what we had in the structure or in a wreck. As Kevin said, ICS was our sheriff's office showing up on the scene, taking command, then realizing 5 people had to be jaws of life cut out of the car and turning to us and go, you're in charge. Guns turned it over to hoses, closed the road, and said, you handle it. That's how it starts, and it works its way up. They do have those 2 private agreements. They're great agreements to have in place. Understand if the agreements aren't going through us as the agent of the state, a lot of the things their expectations are not deliverable or executable.
Thank you.
Yes. Sir.
Do we as an individual agency contact you directly? First part of the question. Second, what must we demonstrate or claim to have in the way of support for the people and the assets coming in?
When we go out to the association members, we will give them a point of contact in your district. We're not the point of contact. We're not assigning. We're not fixing anything in the EOC or UOC. We put the people that have the need together with the people that can solve the need. We are facilitators. And then in the middle of that, we remove roadblocks that are imposed by agencies outside your jurisdiction to expedite that assistance that you need, whether it be material, manpower. We're even there if you just get bored at night and want to call us and talk about water. We do everything up there. The issue being, that's what we're there for. We're not going to fix anything. And that's why I said when we ask for representatives from disciplines They should be an SME that understands chemical and piping and flow and residual. But when you call or your board calls, which is the policy, you have policy, public opinion, and funding as a board. He has operational and strategic deployment, but he can't approve $500,000 or $1 million, or I hope he can.
No.
So the thing is, there's two very intricate components. When I ran disaster response for AT&T, I had all the operations. When I joined the executive team, I had a real hard time taking my hand out of the operation. I had done that for 40 years. The fact is, then I became a facilitator. I became talking on TV. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what. And making sure that I could provide the budget so that Jake could operate. And there's a fiscal responsibility, because when you're all said and done, and it ramps down, as you well know as a board, and I've been on a lot of boards, I'm the president of a multi-million-dollar board right now, not CUEA, but another one. The fact is, the public's going to ask for accountability. Why did you spend $100,000 on it? Why did? And the thing is, with your prudence, you're able to justify it.
So you do not allocate resources, you merely put people in touch
Correct.
with people to get people.
They know what they need. I don't. He will tell me, or his designate, they will tell me, Don, I need 15 backhoes, 14 feet of ductile pipe, 300 feet long, and we need them at this location. We'll go out to the membership, here's what we need, and then I start the process of telling CHP, they're coming from here, going to here. Caltrans, I want you to open this up, I need to bypass the scales. So when they pull out of their yard, LADWP, MDW, we have already cleared the streets that they're going to roll unimpeded to your location.
And we're responsible for funding that operation and for supplying the materials and support.
Correct. And this is not mutual aid like we used to do in the fire service. This is mutual assistance. That's why you signed the face that said, listen, I will pay for the resources I've requested.
I would like to keep us on track with the agenda.
I'll be glad to go back to the Capitol.
Questions from the board? Do we have any questions from the public here? Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr. Boland, on behalf of the board, the district, we really appreciate the presentation. It was very thorough.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Turn it back to Jake.
Slide back up here. We'll finish off with going over a quick review of NIMS. Turn it over to Marty. We'll talk to the board of directors about their rules before and during an emergency, and we'll wrap it up with final questions. Okay. All right, National Incident Management System. In short, it's a combination of everything we talked about plus the federal agencies. NIMS is a comprehensive national approach to all incident management that is applicable at all jurisdictional levels and across functional disciplines. It's a command system, standardized emergency management system for federal agencies. How does it apply to us during the preparedness phase of emergency? The forms, the ICS forms that we would use, it's created and updated by FEMA classes. They put a lot of money into offering classes free to local agencies and grants. They put a lot of money. FEMA's philosophy is, or the Department of Homeland Security, we'll pay the money up front to mitigate disasters because we paid so much money in response. So it's just not worth it. We need to start paying money up front. During the response phase, they provide multiple federal agencies, and a big part of their expertise, they being FEMA, is in emergency management. And during the longest and the most demanding, if you ask me, phase, the recovery phase, expertise comes in with emergency management, damage assessment, debris removal, temporary housing. Here's a photo. I snapped a bunch of photos up at Sonoma County DOC just to show. This is what shows up on your doorstep. If you're in the center of a catastrophic event, these resources come relatively quickly. In particular, Sonoma, I was really impressed through the SIM side. CalAS pushed forward with logistics, and the fire started on a Sunday evening, and that Monday morning, their logistics officer in Sonoma EOC already had to tell CalAS where to put all these cots, blankets, hygiene kits, and everything. The feds, I think these incident command posts, they started arriving around day 9, I want to say, so it was pretty quick. I mean, you think nationally, all the emergencies are already responding to, and they're able to send incident command posts within the first couple of weeks. It's pretty good. I don't know if anybody recognizes this one. This is the Environmental Protection Agency over here. This is the Army Corps of Engineers, and this is FEMA's command post, all outside the Sonoma County EOC. All right, with that said, we'll get to our final topic of the evening, the Board of Directors' roles during emergency preparedness and response.
You want to do a quick intro?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
I don't need that.
Okay.
I just need
Let
my
me,
laptop.
Can I do a quick bio on you? Is that fun?
Yeah.
Okay.
Marty, do you want me to pass you that?
No. They're so exciting they'd be reading them the whole time.
All right.
Maria's background, she's a journalist for 7 years, covering all aspects of local government, courts, politics, public safety for the East San Francisco Bay Area News Group. Now the Bay Area News Group. Maria is a public affairs manager in Alameda County for 11 years, to include public information responsibilities for Highland Hospital and the Alameda County Medical Center. She spent 25 years as an adjunct faculty of California Office of Emergency Services Training Institute, or CSTI, focusing on specialized training for first responders, public safety emergency managers. She is the owner principal of Communication Advantage, I'm getting people's way here, a consulting firm dedicated to addressing specialized communications and news media needs of public agencies and private sector companies that serve public policy, including media relations, crisis management, and messaging branding services for complex or politically sensitive issues. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much.
There's about a couple more pages, but...
No, don't. I sent you, you're supposed to take what you want out of it and throw out the rest. This is really a delight for me to be here because this is my turf. This is my old place. I started as a news reporter here at the Daily Review and the Argus. My first cop beat story that I went out on was a murder in Fremont, and I covered New Haven School District for some time and raised my daughter in Castro Valley. And then I'm a veteran of disasters as well. I was the Alameda County Public Information Officer, D1, for Loma Prieta earthquake, the Oakland firestorm, and the Raiders coming back to Oakland. So I've got a breadth of disasters. Maybe not Don's, resume full of them, but very. Anyway, will it break anybody's heart if I have no PowerPoints and almost no new acronyms? Is that okay with you guys? Yeah, I have a couple of videos I'm going to show you, but I have been sitting here kind of going through and trying to tighten things up because we are quite a bit behind, and I'm sure everybody would like to get out of here tonight. So the title on my piece of it about the roles of leadership in a disaster is kind of a little bit vague, but part of what Jake and I talked about is my particular field of expertise, communications, and the leadership role is so much about communications. So it kind of folds all together. And the experience that in this state that tells us, especially the last few years, it's not a question of what is your role, it's just when are you going to get to exercise it. We know it's going to happen. It's going to be your day in the chute one of these times. Whether it's the earthquake or a flood or a major break or a contamination of your water supply, whatever it is, you know it's coming. And so we are going to talk a little bit about those roles. We know that obviously job number one is having the first responders, the people on site that can take care of the operational side. That's a given. We know that. But it goes beyond that. And the leadership role is really going to be a whole lot about the face you put onto the public, how the communications go, and how things are, what you do now to prepare your troops and then be able to help them and be as useful as possible without getting in the way, which is sometimes a hard thing to do, especially if you're used to being a doer. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those roles are. And what is role number one? Let's talk about number one. What do you think as leaders is the number one role you have in terms of this organization when the disaster does hit. In my mind, it's probably supporting the troops. It's probably being out there and making sure you express your confidence in them, you make yourself available for what they need you for, that you get them now what they need to be ready when the time does come, and this is part of that. Obviously, you've committed some serious time and effort to this. I'm impressed with your consultants that have been working with you, so you're way ahead of so many districts your size that it's really kind of impressive. But let's talk further about that other face of the disaster and what you can do, who you are to the organization. There is a time when your leadership is going to be absolutely critical. In a disaster, when you're talking to the public, when you're trying to put on the face of the organization, one of the most important messages you can put out there is what we used to call the EBOC. That was from somebody at California Specialized Training Institute. He loved acronyms. EBOC is everything's going to be okay. You're the ones that can get up there in a disaster and be the face of everything's going to be okay. That's a big part of what we want from you, is a nice, simple leadership, command presence sort of thing that says, we're here, we're suited up, and we're not going to rest until everybody's safe, the water supply is back, and we can start recovering. That's job number one after supporting the troops, in reality. We're going to talk a little bit about how you do that, how you communicate, some of the preps you can do for that. The media. Let's talk a little bit about the media at the time and news and the public and their interest in these disasters. What's going to happen when you have a really major disaster is the volume and intensity of the interest by the news media and others, the bloggers and the whole world of social media and the public in general is going to be, it's almost overwhelming. Going back 25 years, Loma Prieta earthquake, I mean, that long ago, no social media at the time. In the first 24 hours, I and one sheriff's sergeant that was given to me as an assistant talked to 1,000 reporters in 24 hours from all over the world. Between the briefings and the telephones and the people at the emergency operating center and out on the command post in the field, 1,000 in 24 hours. And that started dying down the 6th day. 7th day, really, and then it was just recovery. Today, it's exponentially worse. In those days, you'd have 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night, say around 11:30 till about 2 or 3 in the morning that was downtime. What happens at 3 o'clock in the morning? It's 6 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. So that's when, at Loma Prieta, we had Dan Rather and Howard K. Smith and all of them out here at 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock our time. Because they're doing live. So you did have a little downtime. Now you don't. Because of the internet, because of the online world, the news cycle is virtually 24 hours. And they want updates every 2 minutes. And you can't possibly meet all those updates. But part of your role will be that person that's 2 or 3 times a day out there to be able to be part of the briefing and to show that command presence. Can you remember examples of people who in that elected position have been able to get up there and perform that kind of a role well?
Giuliani.
Yes, Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani is a good example of the kind of role you have there. Now, there's a couple of things that we'll talk about that are kind of caveats from somebody in my professional position, and I know from inside working with people in this kind of an effort, and in fact at the 9/11, people at the 9/11 scene. But you got to be real careful about that. What's one thing you noticed with Rudy Giuliani? Did he ever stand up at a podium by himself? Never. Never, never. He always had the fire chief and the police chief and the public health director, whoever it was he needed that moment, the FBI director, whoever it was, the people that he would turn the questions to about the details. So I'm making a distinction between that leadership role and being smart enough to know when to turn it over to the others that have the details. That's where you can get yourself in trouble, is trying to be the person that has all those answers. Because that is not your role, and that's not the best use of you. That's wasting you anyway. We really need you for that when we need that star power sort of deal. The media will become a little bit different than the media you deal with at peacetime. We get used to them being sort of a watchdog, even sometimes an adversary. I don't know if this, I get to say things that you don't get to normally say inside the organization because I don't know the culture here, but you may or may not have had some sort of scandal or something where they became an adversary watching you. Well, they can be that at a time of disaster, particularly if you screw up. but more often than not, and they hate hearing this, but more often than not, they become your partner at a time of disaster. Okay, so, but nonetheless, you saw the public information, how quickly it could go sour if the information doesn't go around and if you don't have the right people there doing the speaking on that sort of stuff. I'm going to ask you a little later probably another question about that experience that will be relevant here. But anyway, it's really important to have that role in your mind. I wanted to kind of move right through some of the kinds of stuff. Nobody's going to be invisible here. Once upon a time, the public information model was that one or two people would take all the press calls, all the news interviews. The reality is we can't control that these days. There's people out in the field. They're going to be out there where the pipe is broken, where the homes have got contaminated water, wherever, what it is, the mudslides go. And they're going to be talking to your crews out there. So almost anybody in this organization is potentially going to be a spokesperson for the organization. Rather than fight it, it's better to prepare the organization for a limited amount of response, but then to know when to kick it upstairs. So it goes up to Shireen, and then Shireen will know strategically when it's supposed to go upstairs, and we need your kind of a leadership role out there. One of the other things that you need to do, and this is just shifting a tiny bit out of the news media side, but it's related. One of the things that's really important for you as leaders to do during a time of disaster or real crisis is to be a team, to be cohesive. And that may sound sort of obvious, but what I mean by that is whatever the political differences the day before the disaster, those get suspended till the disaster's over. They just can't be part of it. It has to be a cohesive team. I have found in my experience that it happens rather organically. First of all, I work with cities, counties, state, federal agencies, lots of special districts. Special districts are far better at that than cities or counties, city councils, boards of supervisors. There's a bunch of political reasons that have to do with the identity and the variety of roles you have, but mostly in special districts, you are all here because you do have a common goal and function. So you really have a value and a mission that's very alike, whereas in city councils and boards, that's not necessarily so. And quite frankly, more of them are looking to get their assembly seat and less worried about what they're doing right here today. And I don't mean to be negative, I'm just saying it's a difference. So I find that the special districts, when it's a crisis, the leaders come together better and the politics stay out of it pretty well. But that is a critical part. Whatever the culture is here, that's the time when you have to come together. By the way, I do have to say something. 12 years I was Public Affairs Director for Alameda County. 8 of those years, one of my bosses was Don Parada. And I'm in home turf here. It's no secret anywhere that from there up to the Assembly to the Senate Pro Tem, Don Parada always enjoyed his press coverage. That's a kind way to understate it. I worked with him through 3 different disasters. We'll talk especially about Loma Prieta and the Oakland firestorm. In both cases, those 2 cases, when everything went to hell, Don Parada showed up, he suited up, and he said, tell me what you need me to say, tell me when you need me to be out there, and then I'm going to get out of the way and let you all do your job. Now, I bring him up because he's the most prominent example of people, but I've worked with 400 or 500 different supervisors, city council people, and I found in crisis that tends to happen. That's when they step up and they really find that role, and they color within the lines. So they're very careful not to undermine what's going on in operations. Fair enough? So anyway, there's going to be plenty to do for everybody. You may each have something that is of a particular interest to you. If you work with your public information officer and your strategic communication people, they're going to help you find the messages that hone in on stuff that you're good at or you're the expert at or that you're really interested in, and give you messages to go with that. So that takes us to how do you prepare for this role to be the face of the organization. And by the way, being the face of the organization not only can help you get the kind of recovery assistance you need to get the kind of credibility you need out there, it can define your credibility for decades to come. I mean, who really wants to be the BP oil or the Exxon oil or one of these disasters where the response was so poor? That stuff sticks for decades. Companies don't ever recover from it. Utilities don't. PG&E, how long is it going to take them to get past San Bruno? So these can be defining defining roles you're playing here. And your PIO will help you do that. They understand what our priority is. One of the things that they will help you do is figure out who your target audiences are. You're going to have different target audiences depending on the situation, circumstances, the impacts of the disaster involved. If you have, they were suggesting the possibility of earthquake that disrupts a lot of your pipes. Let's say you have some major contamination and or flooding, whatever it is. What are some of the, let's take Quarry Lakes, just because Quarry Lakes is a big reservoir as you have. If you had a major problem at Quarry Lakes, who would be some of your target audiences, besides the obvious, which is your, 300,000 customers or residents? Who else would be a target audience if you have a major disaster and you've got to call in all this mutual aid and everything?
Park users.
Park users that are neighbors to the quarries, right? Okay. And then let's take something else. We'll just shortcut time here. Schools. There's probably a bunch of schools around there because there's a lot of residential area, right? So you've got specific targeted neighborhoods that you've got to work with. Thank God these days we have social media platforms that can be both the bane of our existence and really help us with that. Nextdoor.com is a miracle worker. What's another target audience you might not be thinking about right now? Okay.
Other electeds in the area.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You want them signing on. And closely related to that, Kevin, you're from fire. When you were back in the streets working the fires, what was the most annoying question that a reporter could come up and ask you at the scene? How much are the damages? You haven't even got the fire out. How many times did you hear that? Well, when it comes to major disaster and you're getting asked that annoying question is the message you need to get to your legislators, to Congress, so that you can be first in line for recovery money and the help you need. And guess what? 4 days later, there might be another disaster in Southern California that takes all the attention and spotlight off your disaster, and suddenly it's too late for that message. So as annoying as it is, damage assessment is a critical function that goes on, and that information needs to be, it's not going to be final, but it needs to be something credible, and it needs to be part of what you can do as leaders out there talking about this sort of stuff.
It's interesting that you state that. Don mentioned the SOC, the State Operations Center. They want one document. They want your 209, your ICS 209. And those agencies that have PIOs getting that initial information, they're the first to get resourced, they get higher priority, and they get higher reimbursement. The sooner and the more accurate that is filled out from the very beginning.
Yeah, and then as I say, it compounds if another disaster. If you've got the big fire in one county and then another one bursts out somewhere else a week later, now you're competing for those precious dollars. Whatever information you're taking out there, I'm emphasizing speed. The news media is going to demand speed from you, but that cannot be a substitute for accuracy. You've got to be careful about that. Going out and guessing. Loma Prieta, as Kevin said, happened before SEMS was adopted in California. I remember being every day, 4 times a day, up in Oakland at the briefings. Now, you can't even, I don't know how many of you remember how many agencies there were over the Cypress structure, but you can imagine there are 10 or 12, and nobody had any coordination. One gets up after another and starts speaking. Well, we had a mayor in Oakland that got up and did a briefing one day and sat there and announced that the San Mateo Bridge had had a piece fall through. So everybody needed, that was the night of the earthquake, and so everybody needed to use the Oakland Bay Bridge. Well, guess where the piece fell through? It was the Oakland Bay Bridge. I mean, you know what kind of havoc that caused? The next day, the Oakland police chief got up and announced that there was so much damage to the county courthouse that all court cases were canceled. Well, there was cosmetic damage. They weren't canceled. We wound up having to put out more than 100 bench warrants for people who failed to show up for their court dates. So you've got to know what the information is. You have to be in a loop, and you cannot jump out ahead just because we want so badly to satisfy the news reporter there. It's a delicate balancing act. It really is. And your whole role in this regard is kind of a balancing act between getting forward and being assertive with leadership. At the same time, you must practice detached patience. And what I mean by that is you have to stay out of the way of the folks in the field. And I don't know how many of you on the board come from some operational background or an engineering background that's related, but those folks have a very difficult time sometimes staying out of the weeds. And that's something I don't know if you remember this, Steve, and we did 13 of those within 4 months last
Oh,
year.
wow.
But I do believe that the one you were at is one of the ones where, when we chose our management team for this 4-day course, the management team was 5 or 6 people, and the person who was playing the role of the city manager, who was to be the director of the EOC, was a guy from an engineering background, an operations background. He could not get out of the weeds. He had to approve every truck. He had to know what tonnage it was. He had to know what chemical this was. This is not what the director of the EOC belongs doing. It's the same thing with you. You do not belong out there worrying about those weeds. So, thought about that?
I was not in that session.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to remember who we had. I do believe it was Santa Clara. I think it was Santa Clara the week before.
Yeah, we had a young law officer that was with the EOC.
Oh,
Yeah.
bless our hearts, all of us. All right, so public information. Let me talk about that a little bit. Each of the previous speakers used the term, you must have a public information officer. If we were doing our regular course, what I'm trying to do here is cram in 4 days in 30 minutes, but if we were doing our regular course, you'd start finding out what the public information job really is like. Or if you tried to do one of these disasters by yourself, you'd find out what it's like. But there is no such thing as a one-person operation. Let's stop and think about what the public information officer does. They've got to bring in information, they've got to process that information, they've got to verify it, do rumor control, go research what's missing in that information. They've got to sit down and somehow strategically decide what's the most critical stuff. And I have a great example from Loma Prieta right here in our county to tell you this, because this is what I call getting focus on the information and then strategizing how to use it. They need to monitor what comes out of that, where it's coming out, if it's reaching the target audiences. Then they need to go back and regurgitate it, get the update, and do the whole thing over again. And there's 2 shifts, 12 hours each a day. Once you start figuring this out, you realize that a public information team in a major incident is really, if it was your sinkhole, it's probably going to be 4 to 6 people. If you have a major earthquake with disruption of your service, it's probably going to be a bunch more than that. So one public information officer is not the answer to everything. Shireen, did you want to add to that, or are you just letting me speak for you? You're happy letting it go.
Definitely would be a team effort.
Yeah. So the question isn't that you're going to, somebody said earlier, you cannot possibly gather and pay for the resources that you would need in this kind of an event, and you couldn't possibly sustain them. But you better know where they're coming from and where you're going to get help. You better have some idea. And part of that, one of the things that's happened is that most organizations do have public information officers now, and they create networks. Do you have a network here in Southern Alameda County? A PIN, Public Information Network?
Similar to the water map, there's a communication group as well that's
Yeah.
formed by them. And
Yeah.
actually, we have a meeting tomorrow.
That's great, because, you know, the nightmare is when this happens and you realize that the public information officers from CHP in the city of Oakland, you never met them before. You know, and then you're out there trying to make this work, because we didn't have a SEMS plan, and that takes us to another issue that we're coming to in just a moment. So the function, the load, is something fierce. They will help draft messages, and they'll help research the answers for the Q&As that they can predict that the public's going to ask about and want to know about, and that the media is going to ask for them. They will practice you if that's what we need to do. If you need a little run-through before you do some important leadership thing, let them put you on camera and practice it. You know, that's how you get good at this stuff. If we were doing one of the classes, the one-day workshops I do, we'd spend all afternoon rotating you on camera and doing practice news interviews. Maybe little briefings, do a press briefing, you know, that sort of thing. Know your Twitter feed or postings, other platform. Be ready to use them if necessary. Be ready to be a signature for a tweet that they want to put out. If you've got a Loney College in your district and there's something that's happening around there and you need to get to that community and nextdoor.com is your best tool, then I don't know if you're apportioned by district or if you all serve at large.
Serve at large.
Okay, so any rate, whatever, there may be somebody whose focus has been around that area or lives up there. That may be the Twitter account that Shireen wants to use, right? So be ready to be at hand for that sort of thing and check in with them. Be ready to be available for that emergency meeting when they suddenly have to call you together to approve this or that, or spending You don't get to spend $500,000 on just your signature?
I just don't know.
And then also be prepared to partner in appearances. I'm going to show you a quick video. This is, and I'm going to show you this, and then I'll tell you why the partnering. But it's possible you'll be asked to partner and do a tandem interview. And there's a bunch of advantages to it, if we can find my mouse. Joplin tornadoes, anybody remember this? I think these were some of the most dramatic disaster videos I've ever seen. You do have speakers on there, don't you? Yes. Okay.
Good morning. A race against time. Rescuers hope for the best, but fear the worst as they search for more survivors of that tornado that ravaged Joplin, Missouri. At least 17 people pulled out alive so far, but the death toll is also rising. At least 117 and counting today, Tuesday, May 24th, 2011.
This is Today with Matt Lauer and
Now let's bring in Michael Wilson, the mayor of Joplin. He joins us along with Craig Kincaid, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Good morning to you. Good morning to you both. Mayor, if I could start with you, over the past couple of days, your town has been described as a war zone. The pictures certainly bear that out. It is just terrible destruction. Do you feel at this point you have the resources you need to handle this disaster?
I think so. We do better if we had overwhelming support from agencies both at the local, state, and federal level. Director Fugan is here this morning to demonstrate that. He's told me just this morning that he's visited with the White House, and we've had pledges from virtually every level that we have the resources and support that we need.
Let me bring you in then, Mr. Fugan. You've spoken to the White House. What have they pledged to do for Joplin?
I spoke to the President this morning. Yesterday, the President did declare this area a disaster area, adding it to the ongoing response here in Missouri to other tornadoes, which means that people here in this county can now apply for FEMA assistance if they didn't have insurance by calling 1-800-621-FEMA. And again, we're here for the long haul, not just for the response, as the mayor said. I think the local and state officials have that. We're here really to support them as they begin thinking about what it's going to take to recover and rebuild.
Okay, there's a little bit more to that, but I'm going to try to save some time for you here. What did they get out of that? What were the advantages of doing that way?
It was a confidence builder.
Yeah. I mean, there's several advantages, and that's one.
They told the public now you can apply and get reimbursement.
Yeah, they were able to get out a major message to the public about relief for individuals, yeah. Do you think maybe for the mayor it's a little bit less nerve-wracking too when you got somebody up there that's been doing this a long time?
Yeah, there was coordination.
Yeah, they knew it. But to me, the best subtle benefit out of that is that now you got the two of them playing nice together and committed to the recovery in the long haul. Fugate committed to FEMA to the long haul, standing there next to the mayor. There's not much of a way to weasel out of that. Not that I'm saying they would have. But at any rate, so there's a lot of benefits to watching strategically for opportunities to play that leadership role out there publicly with the right partners, people that you'd really like to have on your side. I'm going to show you another video in just a minute. But speaking of playing nice together, who knows what a JIC is? One of the only acronyms I'm going to use, and I don't normally use it. You know what a JIC is, and you know what a JIC is. JIC is the Joint Information Center, and that's where the PIOs learn to play nice together. That's what we got out of SEMS. That was one piece of it. How do we coordinate resources so that we're partnering rather than competing or working in silos against each other? And a JIC can look, it's a lot like a microcosm of the EOCs. We've seen some slides today of different EOCs. This is one kind. Some of them are pretty elaborate, like the one you saw for the National Guard, and everything in between. In my presentation and workshops, I have pictures of a half a dozen JICs that are just as varied. The JIC in Alameda County out at the Dublin Jail, at the center out there, at the Emergency Operating Center out there, is a pretty elaborate center. It's got a big pit that's much bigger than this room, goes down. It's got, I prefer the 9 screens it has over 155-foot screen, when you can track a lot of different things. It's got little cubicle offices around the perimeter and a place where the lead PIO and the incident command, the director of the EOC and others can have private, quiet time to strategize and have small meetings that they may need, et cetera, et cetera. So a JIC is a Joint Information Center, and that Joint Information Center is going to be your best friend in helping you do your job and play your role, get prepped for it. It's always going to be very close to the director of the EOC. It has to be. You cannot have communications, siloed out away from the heartbeat of where the decisions are being made. It's like when we were kids and you'd play that game of gossip, you'd tell a secret to the person next to you and it goes around the circle and it bears no resemblance to the original story once it gets to the end of the circle, right? So they have to work hand in hand. And Steve, I don't know if you got a chance to come in and look at our nerve center and my TV station when you did the earthquake lab.
No, we didn't.
You didn't get to do that? Did you?
Do you remember me there?
Oh yeah, you were in there, that's
I think
right.
you lost some nerves in your nerve center, right?
Well, we had it's kind of a different facility we were using there, that training facility, but you know, you saw how critical that was, that communication between the director of the EOC and the public information people.
Jake and I have also been out to the sheriff's office and seen that in a live drill.
Here in Alameda County, out in Dublin. Yeah, okay, great. But you also saw, I think in San Mateo we probably had 3 people assigned to public information. It's nowhere near enough, huh?
No.
Yeah, and you know, I was their pain in the ass and I'm their best friend. See, I not only lecture the parts they have to do with communications, but on the big day of the exercise, I run a TV studio and I chase them around, and, you know. Which brings me to another subject, one of those pitfalls to watch out for as you're out there playing that role. Especially since you'll have downtime and you won't be out there in the weeds. You could get phone calls from people who want you to put them as top priority. Not Oprah's Orchard in Alameda County, but, you know, in the exercise that you were part of, one of the things I throw in there, or we throw in our simulation, is about halfway through, we have a mayor who's whose dog is trapped in his house, his little dog Fluffy, it's a little Yorkie, and is trapped in his house, and he wants every emergency worker to stop and come out and save his dog. And so we throw that into the mix. And we throw a couple other curveballs like that. But the idea is to learn how to prioritize information and especially how to respond when you get that kind of pressure. You can't give in to that. You have to simply, that's when you get to dump it on your operations people and say, listen, I'm here, I'm doing everything I can to support them, but I'm leaving the triage decisions to the experts that know where we need to put our attention first. And that's one of those kind of messages I always prepare for clients or in disasters for the leadership, so that they have something at hand on a little card that they can actually go to when somebody's calling them up and trying to divert their attention, trying to get them to go to places they don't need to be going. So that's one of those pitfalls that you can get into out there. Another one is just wanting so desperately to have the right answer that you come up with something and then you think, you know, it's kind of like when you're a teenager and you go on a first date and there's quiet time at the table, and it's really awkward. So you say something, and then a second later you're saying to yourself, why the hell did I say that? They're going to think I'm a moron, right? You know, so don't go making up stuff. Go in there with some prepared stuff. And I'm going to show you a quick clip of one of those kind of pitfalls. This is an elected official who was a rising star. Notice I used the was a rising star. Anybody remember just 2 years ago when we had an officer shooting of an African-American citizen in Boston, and there were a bunch of Baltimore, and there was a bunch of protests? Remember that? This one's not on the screen.
He died in the patio.
Yeah, I think you're right, that's right. You probably, there's too many of these, it's sad.
Yeah.
Way too many. Okay, let me pull up this one. Sometimes you can have a great key message, and we're going to talk about key messages, and the best laid message falls apart. Uh-oh, where is it? Oh, here we are, right here.
questions. To start off by saying,
Deputy Raleigh.
as far as police response, the police has done, I think, one question and answer this evening, and will continue to make themselves available for updates on our public safety response. This is about our call for peace in the city. So we'll be taking questions about that. Any questions?
Doesn't matter that you can't hear the question, it'll be obvious what it was.
Well, we've had these types of conversations before, and I've made it very clear that I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. It's a very delicate balance because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the cars and the other things that were going on, we also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well. And we
Anybody remember that little soundbite?
Yeah.
There's so many things wrong with that, I don't even know where to start. She was actually trying to express a very good key message here. It's what I call a balanced message. What she was trying to say, of course, was that we want to give protesters their right to free speech and the space to do so peacefully. At the same time, what is our priority? We have to protect the public and property of the city of Baltimore. And she obviously went off script there, and quite frankly, it was the end of her star rising. It was just a terrible blunder. But there's other lessons that are involved there. Notice she had the staff people behind her I was talking about. To be there is to be resources. But what happens is leadership has not given staff the confidence to feel they can step in, even in a situation like that where the cameras are rolling, and tap them and say, hold on a second. Nobody there turned around to fix that for her.
She didn't have any police around her either.
Yeah, I don't know if any of them were police out of uniform or not, but you would assume somebody in a uniform would have been there, yes. Yeah. Absolutely, I agree with you. But whatever, it's one thing to help provide the messages and the people, but if you don't give public information or your general manager or somebody the sense of confidence that they can say, wait a minute, we got to fix this right now. As embarrassing as it would have been better than going the way it did. So just one of those little lessons learned. I have lots of those videos, but we don't have time for them. Some of them are really fun. Key messages are an art form. Key messages are the concise, brief, simple, active way to say something. How do you tell a story of 1,000 words and 500 details and situations in 15 seconds? Less is more, less is more, less is more. To quote our governor, as he gave his last State of the State address yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah. But at any rate, less is more. There is nothing that you can say in 60 or 70 seconds that you can't say better in 15 seconds. No matter how complex the situation, you must break it down into small pieces. When you get to the end of the good stuff you planned, stop talking. Don't try to make it longer. And that is the hardest part. When I do workshops, and I put 25,000 people on camera in the last 30 years. And when I do 9 out of 10 of them, the hard part is getting the clutter out of it so they get down to the simple stuff. Good messages have empathy. When you're under fire and under stress, it is hard to think empathy. You're thinking operations. You're thinking we need dollars. You're thinking we need to recover this body or, clean up this contamination. You're thinking science and all this other stuff. The start of a good message in wartime, in disaster, in crisis, in scandal, starts with empathy. We understand the public is concerned about that. We want to assure you we're here, and we're not going to rest till this is fixed. It's got action, and it's got enough context so they understand what the story was about. And then, once you've got that, if you've got the right key message, it frames all the other stuff. Everything you answer, every Q&A is going to wind up somehow mirroring or reflecting, echoing those key messages, if you got the right ones. So it's sticking with simple messages and being prepared for those tough Q&As. We talked about dealing with pressure. Let's see, I had another video to show you, but we are behind, so I'm going to, you want to go to Q&A?
I'll leave it to the president of the board as far as time.
emergency in.
Yeah, that's what I had. I think what I'll do is offer you these handouts that I have, and then open it up for questions on something you'd like to specifically talk about.
After Marty, I've got about a minute.
We'll take one more video.
One more video?
More President wants one more video,
Okay.
and then Q&A.
Yeah, okay. This is, who remembers the famous FEMA director who lost his job during Katrina? Brownie?
Brownie.
Come on, we remember Brownie, right?
You're doing great work, Brownie.
Yeah, great work. Okay, let me go back to my... Now this is a clip. You know, I could show more ugly stuff, but if Brownie had let his deputy director of FEMA, Patrick Rohde, do more of the national news, Brownie might have kept his job. That's when one person is trying to do everything. By the way, the other problem with one person doing everything is exhaustion. With Giuliani,
Now an
they were
overview of the government's response to this disaster from the Deputy Director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Patrick Rohde. I spoke with him a short time ago.
Listen for his key
Mr. Rohde, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Nice to be here.
Is there an overview way to describe what this storm has done?
It's very difficult to put it in terms just yet as we are truly assessing it, but I will say that what you're looking at right now represents one of the most massive response operations that perhaps the federal government, in conjunction with any state, has ever undertaken.
Give us a scope for what you say that.
We are looking at massive amounts of commodities, disaster assistance teams. We're looking at urban search and rescue teams, all of which were pre-deployed ahead of this pending Cat 5 hurricane when it was pending. Now that we have seen landfall, and now that we are getting a better idea of what we're seeing on the ground, we're looking at major operations whereby response elements are going to be utilized here in the next couple of days. We're looking at some of the largest search and rescue types of responses that we've seen in this country in quite some time.
There are still people trapped and unaccounted for, is that correct?
We believe that that is correct. Unfortunately, it's going to be a couple of days of going through and making these very, very difficult assessments in the most damaged areas before we can truly know what we're looking at.
Is there a system for doing that? Have you all worked out a grid system of some kind for checking out every place?
That's something that we're working on right now with both the cities and the states as we go through this. We're really relying upon a combination of their intelligence and also our intelligence. We're relying upon many federal partners that include the Coast Guard, which we've seen many pictures on today that have had the opportunity and successfully have been lifting people to safety. We're relying upon many different partners, ranging, of course, from the Coast Guard all the way to urban search and rescue teams, to disaster medical assistance teams, to really help us make those assessments as we are trying to deal with those most in need.
Are we talking hundreds of people who may be still out there somewhere?
It's very, very difficult to say, Jim, but I think it's fair to say, it's safe to say, just given the scope of this, that we have to assume that there are several hundred people out there that still need our help today and perhaps still need our help in the days ahead.
What about the death toll? The firm death toll we have heard is up over 50. Can you add anything firm to that?
I really can't add too much to that at this time. However, just given the wide scope of what we've seen over the last 48 hours, I think it's safe to say that that death toll, unfortunately, may be getting higher.
What'd you think of his work?
Pretty impressive.
12 hours after landfall? 12, 14, something like that. I like this clip for several reasons. First of all, what were his key messages? All that information, and he answered a lot of questions. What key points did he want us to understand? They're doing a lot.
Working with partners.
Partners.
And they're there for the long haul.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah. It's a commitment. It's a massive response. Partnerships are critical. He's thanking his partners, and he cares. And another thing I like about this clip is he's a guy that people have different personalities, and if I use political examples, it's not for party reasons whatsoever, it's just who can teach us communications. And Bill Clinton, back in his presidency, he could cry at the drop of a hat. You know, he was a very emotive sort of guy. Barack Obama was very stoic. I'm not even going to try to describe current events, but, you know, people have different styles. The trick is you got to be true to who you are. He's a stoic sort of guy, a lot of dignity, kind of a formal guy. How did he get across empathy without dripping it or being anybody phony?
Came off sincere.
He used one word. What was the word? Somebody heard it. That's it. Unfortunately. He used the word unfortunately twice. That's all he had to do to say. And he didn't say, when he was asked how many people are still out there, he didn't just say there could be hundreds. He added to it that need our help and may need our help in the days to come. Simple, little, gentle, subtle ways of showing they cared. So he did a pretty darn good job, I think. I mean, I hate the word utilize. I've never figured out what utilize does better than use does. Do you utilize something better if you utilize it than if you just use it? I don't know. And then pre-deployed.
The curriculum editors won't let us use the word utilize.
Yeah, I detest it. I detest it. I ding people on it all the time. I mean, my rule is try to stay with words, except the ones that are nouns that are part of what you're trying to do here. Try to use words that you would use inside the walls of your house. And I try to envision ever going home and telling my daughter when she was being a pain or wasn't doing her homework, I can't imagine going to her and saying, utilize your head, you're impacting the long-term feasibility of your future. You know? So anyway, but those are minor dings for a guy who did this job, as I say. He should have been able to do more of this stuff. Now, the other reason, the closing reason I will mention that I like this clip so much is if you really think you've got the most complex disaster going and it takes a lot more time to tell the story, and they can't possibly ask you to answer a question in 10 or 15 seconds. That was 6 questions and answers. We got the questions and the answers. You know how long that interview was? 2 minutes and 43 seconds. So the next time you want to answer a question in 65 seconds for me, less is more. Any questions? Or as Henry Kissinger said 40 years ago, I love this, he used to go out on the podium and he'd say, who has questions for my answers?
Now, one right here.
You got one right here.
What are your thoughts on utilizing the web term? Actually, the web.
I'd rather use
it. For both real-time information and also opening up our own operational database to the public so they can see where we stand and where that we've identified their problem and where the priority is.
I was hoping somebody would ask that very question because I just didn't have the time to really bring up the whole social media subject and less of a Q&A. But I think that it's an absolute vital tool during disaster response. It can be a pain in the neck too. The rule is with online tools and platforms. Oh, you do?
Thank you.
Is you have to have those platforms that you can sustain. If they're going to go stale and you're not going to keep them up, don't develop them. In other words, don't implement 5 or 6 of the platforms when you can only really take care of 2 and use them. But they are vital. Nextdoor.com, as I said, allows you to do such hyper-localized stuff. Twitter can be incredibly helpful. On the other hand, don't put too many eggs in the basket of the online platforms. What happened up in the fires in Sonoma County in the wine country? They didn't have any access. Nobody could get any of the online stuff. The towers were gone. And so, you know, it's only one more tool in the toolbox, but it's a really useful one. Your website, you should have pages that are dedicated, available, so if something happens, you can quickly jump on those pages and use them for that purpose. I also, by the way, as old-fashioned as it sounds, let's say they lost cell phone coverage like crazy up there. I really believe in having something as simple as the a 1-800 or a couple of lines that are there and are not used for anything because you don't want to try to develop those lines when you're in the middle of the emergency.
There's a real reluctance on the part of operators to share their data with the public, particularly operational status. Would you think we need to overcome that on that reluctance?
I think, I'm not sure, I'm not going to sit there and try to weigh in on opening up everything you do, but I do think that you can be using some of the platforms to your advantage, that share a lot of real time. You shouldn't have anything to hide.
Not in an emergency. There's a security mindset that we can't tell people what's going on because it makes us more vulnerable. I would think in an emergency situation, just the opposite. We need to get the information out.
Yeah, and I think that Jake may have better ideas about your operations than that, but I can sure see some of the security questions people would have. you know, I don't want to try to make a decision like that with this
I'm just throwing it
organization.
out as an issue for us to
Yeah.
grapple with.
This little book is something I developed years and years ago, and it's in the 5th or 6th edition. It's just a little help on how to deal with news media, how to survive an interview. It's got a little about key messaging in it, and some tips for when you're actually in the middle of an interview, how to succeed, and pitfalls to avoid, and there's some other stuff in here, so hopefully you'll enjoy that. I appreciate you having me here. Is there anything else you need from me?
No, thank you so much. It was good. Wish we could have had you longer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will go ahead and wrap this up for the night. Do you need anything else from me, Marty? Or?
Nope. I'm just going to shut this down so you can have your screen back. Actually, I think you shut it down.
So moving forward, I have some
What's going here?
dance up here.
Sorry.
That's fine. Moving forward, I have some near-term goals. Got some near-term goals, and to make my goals when I first got here, and as I continue to reevaluate them, it's all backwards planning. What do I backwards plan off of? It goes back to the California Emergency Services Act, and in particular Title 19, Division 2, Chapter 1, which states to receive reimbursement, most focus on planning, training, exercises, and documentation of everything. So my goals involve planning, training, exercises, and documentation. For the plan, continue to update and create new plans. A point of focus of mine, especially now that this evening passed and I get some more time, will be the business continuity plan and moving that forward. That'll take a interdepartmental effort, just like the local hazard mitigation plan did, and I'll definitely be asking for assistance with creating that plan. For training, number one, people learn a lot with hands-on training. So I will always recommend when there's a chance to deploy when it's feasible, to deploy our employees. And whether it's like Shireen getting FaceTime with local news agencies during the creek response, or myself and Dan going to Sonoma, or Thomas and Therese out in the creek, always when there's a chance, I think it's the best training you can get is hands-on emergency response training. Also continue to assess ICS capability and training appropriate for field staff and the EOC team. You know, we talked about efforts we made with DMD, but there's also other fields I'm really interested in on how we can increase their readiness and incorporate ICS into the daily, to include our treatment plant operators, treatment facility operators, some of our maintenance personnel, and some of our water supply personnel. We actually deal with pretty routine emergencies, pretty routinely. Continue interagency partnerships, as I stated earlier. I think it's huge. Just for myself and other people who represent the district at these agencies, just to learn the language and build relationships is very important when it comes to a disaster response. Exercise, continue to have internal exercises within the district to include ICS 300, 400, and section-specific training, and to continue to participate in operational, appropriate external exercises. Yesterday I was at Alameda County OES, and they're talking about Yellow Command, which is Urban Command is a security part that happens every year in the fall. There's also these other exercises, and Yellow Command is for emergency managers to exercise their response within their jurisdiction. And while the lady was talking, she said, please email me if you are interested in this exercise. And I emailed her while I was talking. Yeah, there's a few things I want to exercise with our particular district, include our ability to communicate with the county and other agencies, our ability to make resource requests, which go through the county and eventually up to Don Bolin, and participate in the Joint Information Center training again. Those are just a few of the concepts we initially talked about. And if there's any exercise within the region or the state, it would be great to participate with those partners as well. And document everything. I've been documenting everything since I got here. Somebody asked, saying what we've done in preparedness to enable us to be reimbursed. Resources I need to support my goals. I'll continue to take advantage of free training through UOSI, through DEMA, and through where Marty works, CSTI. I'll continue to need consultant support for plans, training, and exercises. And as the department managers, I'll continue to ask, I'll have even more expectations of your employees that are assisting with emergency preparedness. As we build our program, I'll just need more time from them, whether it's for helping create plans, going to training classes, whatever. Because it's going to take, as Marty said, everybody. It's going to take an entire team to deal with the response if emergency were to happen. The benefits of these near-term goals and what we've done in the last year is helps reduce legal liability, provides financial benefit in the reimbursement process. We're using proven best practice when we learn to use ICS and work within SIMs and NIMS, and improves the relationship of trust with our customers and see that we are focusing on emergency preparedness daily here in our district. That said, any questions?
I just wanted, before you go to questions, on a couple slides back, when Jake was talking about next steps, more near term, this is in alignment with the board's strategic planning. If you recall, in workshop number 3, we talked about emergency response and next steps. Jake mentioned that he's working on the business continuity plan. That's going to be a major effort cross-departmental and ongoing training, such as an example, we may decide we want additional public outreach training. So I just talked to Marty Boyer, asked her if she'd be interested in coming back for perhaps a one-day workshop for staff, could include the board. We would have to think about it. But so there's a lot of training that we're very much interested in planning to embark on this next year. I just wanted to supplement that to connect the dots between the board's strategic planning and what Jake's talking about in terms of next steps.
John? Yeah, first an editorial comment. In working on contingency operations, we attempted to avoid the word plan because we didn't know what was coming. We talked about capabilities. But in this, you now have a concept of what scale we need to develop capabilities for, how much in the development of a budget to be able to achieve that?
So the business continuity plan will help determine our capabilities after response. It identifies our critical work functions, right? And so then once we get that plan in place, you can look at who are we dedicating emergency response business continuity plan.
So to quantify the response, do you have an idea, a concept of what we're targeting for our ability to be able to accomplish in what time frame? 1,000 breaks in 30 days? Do we have any concept of what we're trying to develop in order to be able to respond to a potential catastrophe?
May I respond to that, Jake?
Yes, Steve.
We are in the process of developing that type of understanding of that capability. The short answer is we don't have a ready, off-the-shelf answer for that. That's going to take a cross-departmental effort. That's been identified indeed in the engineering report that's going to get kicked off in the next fiscal year, because that's more than what operations can handle. We deal with real-time events. We have resource issues. We don't have the capabilities of taking the time out to analyze and develop that understanding of the capabilities necessary or the plans that would be executed. That has to be done in a cross-departmental effort led by the engineering department, who has capacity to strategize, engineer, and plan, rather than work with or have that responsibility solely on people that are putting out fires every day.
Okay, I would possibly take exception to the fact that it needs to be led by engineering, although I think they're a critical component. This is truly a district-wide response from all departments that have to be repurposed. There was a comment made by one of the fellows on the call that 23% of your employees aren't going to be here, and you have to repoint. You're not going to do the work, you're going to be managing the work. You need, as pointed out, you need the assets to be able to support. There's no limit to how much support you can get if you have the assets in place to be able, and the ability to be able to support them. Not being able to quantify that, and it's a question long before you came, Jake. I've asked, give me a simple concept of what we're trying to do, or we're trying to plan for, and that answer has never been made yet. And it doesn't strike me that we can't at least grab some number to give us a frame of reference to what the heck you're trying to do.
Wait, hold on. Let's be really fair here. Maybe the cutoff point where we plan is what we can do in-house. After that ability, we trigger mutual aid or SIMs. The number you're looking for will be determined by the incident commander. It's different. The resources need varies with each incident.
Mutual aid does not come with the assets necessary to accomplish the task. You get bodies and you might get some equipment.
So John, take a step back. So when the incident happens, you started the ICS system, you trigger it, you have the incident commander, you have this really nice checklist, somebody will go out and quantify the disaster.
They won't be available.
Based on that quantification, we estimate the resource need, then we send out the notification, and you'll come to us.
It has been a major failure on our part in the area of contingency planning programs and from this district since I've been on the board. And we're talking about getting there. That's good news. But it's not that hard to come up with a concept and some targets.
I guess we have to disagree, because I think we have a system in place that will give us the resources we need for incidents based on actual situation and
we have absolutely
assessment.
No frame of reference to work.
This district cannot afford to be so prepared that we will have a whole bunch of people standing out here just waiting for a disaster to happen.
We don't. We call them when they're needed, but you have to have the assets.
And we have a process to trigger for the assets to come in, and that's what today's presentation was all about.
This is not a capital construction project where we have 3 to 4 years to respond.
It is not. But we...
If I can just interject. We understand staff understands very much what Director Reed is getting at, and we take no exception to what you're saying. At the same time, Director Huang is correct in how we would respond to an emergency. What I'm trying to offer is, we're not East Bay Mud. We're a small little water district. So the only way we can deal with this is through cross-departmental teams where engineering and operations works together to collaborate on strategic planning in a way that can quantify our capabilities, identify how we want to move forward in a response or a recovery. And so all of that has been identified in our capital improvement program to be a part of the next engineering report that's been that you've approved and is in our budget.
Okay. How about if we come further down the line here? Director Akbari?
Well, did Director Huang have a chance to ask a question?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to leave with a statement that I think our district is prepared. Our program could definitely be better. I do not want to leave with our customers with the impression that we do not have a system in place. We do. It is just not perfect. We're working on it.
Well, for me, I think this meeting was very, very helpful because I don't have any sort of baseline to work off of, and so for me it was very educational. In terms of looking at I mean, I'm trying to figure out how much some of these things would cost. So do we have some sort of baseline for, you know, if it's do we have like some small catastrophe, medium catastrophe, large catastrophe kind of breakdowns of what kind of cost and equipment and manpower those would require? And I guess those are very vague terminology, and you can kind of define it.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. A number of years ago, we did a comprehensive seismic vulnerability assessment of the district that identified exactly what you're asking for. I don't remember the hundreds of millions of dollars a 7.9 earthquake impact was to the district, but the most financial impact was to the community. With the loss of water, industry can't operate, people are out of jobs, so it was hundreds of millions of dollars impacted to our service area. But we've done that report. We're trying to build off of it. You and I talked in the last committee meeting about engineering implementing a capital improvement project that reinforced our capabilities of providing emergency cross connections or emergency connections across the Hayward Fault. That's just an example. We've seismically upgraded our storage tanks. We put in remote actuated isolation valves. So we've been building for decades to improve our capabilities to withstand a major seismic event. We've come a long, long way, but we've got a ways to go to get where we want to be. It's like it's continuous improvement. It never ends. And so, have I answered your question?
Yeah, I mean, would you mind sharing that report with me?
It's a book. It's about that thick. Ed Stevenson, my best friend here, can provide you with a hard copy, or maybe not. Maybe it's an electronic copy at this point.
Yeah, I think that's something that I'd like to get over.
I was handed that book as a new board member. It made for very good midnight reading. It's an eye opener to see the tens of thousands of main breaks that we're expecting on that type of major earthquake.
Tens of thousands.
All right, Director Gunther?
5 figures.
I don't necessarily share the same opinion that we're in a terrible shape. We've done several, I can think of 3, I believe, very important events that this district did. We sent a team to Liberty after Katrina. Experienced people that have gone into an area where everything was basically destroyed. We're down the street. John's right, Director Weed's right. When it hits, what happened in Liberty? There were 2 guys, if I remember correctly. They weren't in there moving shovels. They were in there directing. But when we did that, our guys came back with that knowledge. So we already know that. We already know that when the big one hits, I don't know how many people remember that, but I'm sure a lot of our people on this staff remember that, hey, we're not going to be the guys digging the holes. We're going to be the guy running with the truck from San Diego digging the hole. We sent guys to Napa. Same thing. If I remember correctly, we sent guys to Napa. And when you went to Sonoma. So there's nothing that beats that real experience. It may have cost us a little bit, but the value and benefit we got from there, unbelievable. I fully support doing that any chance we get. There's no better training than to be out there and send a group in, because we're going to have another problem when the major earthquake hits. You're absolutely correct. Probably 50% of our workforce will not be available. And we're not going to have hotels to put these people in. When the Exxon Valdez went on the ground up in Alaska, they almost sent me out of Coast Guard headquarters. I was considered essential at the time. They were looking to send people from Washington, D.C. up there. There was, I think, one motel in Valdez. And I think Dan Rowdy was trying to corner that hotel. There was no infrastructure. The Navy sent up a berthing ship. We're learning as time goes on how to address this. We're not alone. I don't think there's any community anywhere that has a plan that says, we're going to get hit with this, it's going to do this, and this is how we're going to react. You have to be flexible. I see one of the worst things that could happen is we get an earthquake, either in the middle of the summer, and here comes the wildfire down the hill and takes out half the town because we don't have your fire water, or we get the earthquake that hits right after we just had a downpour like we did today, and oh, here come the hills down into town. And we're going to have to react to that. It's about being able to react. You get that through training, and you get that through experience. So, while we have a lot to go, we have a lot to learn, and certainly a lot to prepare for, because yes, we have the Hayward Fault that runs right through us, Calaveras, and the other one, the Mission, they're here. We had a landslide a few years ago, you can still see it, coming down from Mission. We've had the pipe break. We have the railroad that runs through this town, a couple spots. And we have a couple interstate freeways, which move who knows all sorts of types of chemicals. So, I just like to think, I like to look at our glasses half full, not half empty. We should be positive, we should be proud of what we got, and we should continue to move forward.
Jim, with the status of the earthquake insurance market, with an earthquake come a lot of fires. Do we have fire insurance?
May I close with a few comments?
If I may answer, just to reinforce what our next steps are.
Okay. So, let me start off with a couple of concerns. I passed along to Mr. Shaver, to yourself, some articles about what actually happened in the response to the fires up in Sonoma and Napa. And I don't want to throw cold water on what Mr. Bollard was saying, but when you looked at the request for equipment that was made in the first hours, let's say the Tubbs fire, within 2 hours they knew that they needed a certain number of fleets of fire engines. But, excuse me, it took days, up to 2 weeks, for them to even get a partial fulfillment of the equipment that was required. And that was for fire trucks, for utility pole workers, for all kinds of equipment, as you saw. And in one of those articles that I passed along, which was a pretty detailed analysis, it was showing that year by year in the state of California, less and less equipment is being made available for the major events, let's just call them events, that are going on. And in the case of the Northern County fires, San Francisco's responding with like one vehicle on the first day, one fire truck, Alameda County with 3. You know, the surrounding counties were hardly supportive and responsive. And that was one reason that the fires really went out of control. There was no real response. So I think that's something that we need to take a closer look at. Where are the capabilities? It's something that I think is being looked at the state level right now, but is very much a concern to me in terms of, let's say, a major earthquake happening in the area.
Well, if I could add to that a little bit, I think one of the problems was they had no plan or no capability locally pre-thought out of where to put a large number. So that's why they used weed and some other locations, a number of fairgrounds, because they had not identified locations in their community that could immediately handle large numbers of support vehicles and people. That's one of the reasons for the slow response.
Right.
Yeah. I myself think Kevin did read the article, director, and I'll talk, and Kevin, feel free to jump in. And I was part of that response on multiple levels, right? And so nationally, resources were drained. So that was definitely a big part of it. So when Cal Fire sent in for fire mutual assistance, right, and people started saying no, it's hard for first responders to say no. But they were exhausted nationally. I know in the military, we were so exhausted, we couldn't even get MREs. I've never heard of the military running out. It's our mill-ready MREs, right? The manufacturers couldn't keep up. Now, as you said, there's a trend, though, right? The article showed there was a trend of basically the mutual assistance response is dwindling, right? And so that's a concern. Kevin could talk more about that, but that's part of my point too in the presentation was I think climate change is here and emergencies are here. So you're right, we got to address how we're going to find these resources as this becomes normal. Yeah, anything on that?
Well, just to understand what went on with emergency response since the 2008 recession. There's been over a 40% reduction in emergency services public safety resources, and local governments still haven't recovered. Industry says that the new baseline is what they achieved in terms of that downturn, and with the debate that's currently going on with unfunded liabilities for public pension and health care, there's a real competition for resources. We could have sent 10,000 fire engines to Sonoma County. You can't do anything with a 95-mile-an-hour wind in that fuel load. And the reason we lost 10,000 homes is they were in areas that they didn't used to have homes on all prior fire events. If you look at the footprint of that fire, it burned exactly what it did in 1965. It's 95% predictable. It's just fuel, weather, and topography. And really, it's an issue of where do humans want to interact with wildfire. And I think understanding what Director Weed is saying about having a target capability list and I did strategic planning for the Office of the Fire Chief for 12 years. You guys can do exactly the same thing. Is you know what the critical task analysis is to restore a meter at a home. You know what it would be to restore a water main break based on what size water mains you have. You know how long that takes and what resources it takes. Then it really is the public, at least in the fire protection side of it, they determine what level of service they'll tolerate. In San Jose, they chose to tolerate an 8-minute response time 80% of the time. That's double the national average. The city's not burning down, and insurance rates are not going up. So it's a matter of, once you understand what resources and capabilities you have and how long, what are the critical tasks and what are the resources, then you can develop that. In terms of mutual aid resources, actually, I wish Don would have brought it out because he would have shown the trending analysis of what's going on with utilities versus public safety. The utility base camp was set up sooner and faster resourced than governmental resources could go to the event. And I think it's because utilities are not as harnessed by the governmental budgeting process that local governments and regional governments are in terms of how they move resources. They have a much more robust system that if we could borrow their system, we could move stuff as effectively as they did. It'd be interesting to find out what their resource requests were versus the public safety side.
Yeah, what that article was pointing to, that analysis, was that we have a statewide problem. It's not just localized up in, the recent fires that we had. But we have a real statewide problem where the trend is going down in terms of the mutual aid response to major events. It even happened down Santa Barbara and Montecito. There was certainly a lot more that could have been done sooner, quicker, earlier. But
that downward trend started about the recession?
No, it's been going on for like 2 decades.
Oh, 2 decades.
So I think I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just pointing to a problem, and that we as a government agency working with other government agencies, I think, need to put pressure on our elected legislators to kind of remedy the problem. And it was kind of pointed out toward the end of the article that the governor's office is very concerned about this, and so people are looking at it. And we're one of those public agencies that should have a voice at the table to say, hey, here's what we're going to need in the event of a major quake on the Hayward Fault. Number 2, one thing that came out in the Northern County fires was the lack of documentation that all of these public agencies had in terms of being able to respond to filing with FEMA and other relief organizations, governmental. So I want to compliment our team and Jake on putting emphasis on that documentation, because now many of the agencies in the northern counties simply never kept proper records of what their assets were, the purchase receipts, what they paid for with contractors on different things. It was such a devastating loss of proper documentation that you would think any government agency should have on file. But that's the biggest impediment right now for them getting reimbursed on loss of assets. So thank you for your emphasis on that here. And I want to pick up from where Director Gunther left off. I look at the glasses a little bit more than half full. I remember when that 2008 seismic vulnerability study finally came out. That's the thick book. And I campaigned for the board specifically so that we would get started on spending the money, which was, an enormous amount of money for this agency, to at least get the major pipelines across the Hayward Fault retrofitted for seismic safety. And we completed a lot of that work by 2014, a relatively short period of time, with 2 bonds. So I think that the community should feel a little bit relieved that we at least can carry a major portion of our water supply from the east side of the fault to the west side of the fault. But we were also retrofitting reservoir roofs, reservoir foundations. We put in the backup generator with backup fuel supply down at Mallory Peralta. We've done a number of very important seismic upgrades across the community, which 10 years ago, when the report came out in 2008, we made a lot of progress in a 10-year time period. So I think we as a board, I would say, owe a compliment to, the entire team effort that was involved, from everything from getting the financing in place to doing the engineering work to our contractors. It's taken a lot of work. I wanted to pick up on just two other things. One is the readiness of the district to respond in a major event. We are a relatively small organization. We have half as many people as my high school class, which is the way I think about it. And so you can know virtually every person's name in this organization, right? And it's really a small team that is responsible for about 350,000 people in the community. We have half the budget, or we're at about half the budget of the city of Fremont, with a fraction of the number of employees. And I think we're operating at quite a peak efficiency for what we're doing, and the community needs to hear how well prepared we are. And that kind of leads into a point, I believe, that was raised earlier about communications, that you're always trying to communicate to the public where you are, your readiness, the investments that we have made on behalf of the ratepayers. It's their dollars, it's their investment in our readiness. And you can never say enough to get the word out. Here's what we've invested, here's where we're prepared, but when the big one comes, we will have thousands of main breaks across the Tri-City area. It may take up to, like the report says, up to 9 months for 80%, 90% of the community to be back up with water service. What do you do during that period of time? What are the precautionary things you can do as a household? We need to help people in understanding that dynamic. What happens after an event? They'll be blaming the water district, but they should know what we've done up to a critical point, at least to be able to provide fire service, right, in the community. And going back to Steve Dennis, it's hard for a lot of people to realize that during his career here, and he started back, I think, in the late 60s. After 9/11, he put together essentially the national plan for how water districts should respond to an emergency. And he received the highest award from AWWA that can be given, the nation's highest award for emergency preparedness. That came out of this district. We've become the example for lots of other districts that are trying to replicate something similar. And so, I'm not trying to pat us on the back too hard, but between Steve Dennis and yourself, covering multiple decades now, for a small agency, we're kind of at the top of our game, really. We even have purchased all the backup equipment, and have set them up near the fire departments. So there's a lot to be thankful for where we are at this point. I would just close with this, and I'm repeating myself. This is the 150-year anniversary of the 1868 earthquake, which pretty much destroyed everything from Richmond down to San Jose. As far as scientists know, the interval between major quakes 7.0 or higher has been 90 to 165 years. The average is 140. This is year 150 right now. So we're past the average, and we're getting close to what's been the recorded maximum for a major quake. And so I think we need to get the word out. And we're one of the only public agencies covering the entire Tri-City area where we can effectively get the word out to the entire community. Prepare, you know, stock up on supplies, on water, and all these different things. So we have a lot of people that are new to the community that just moved here in the last 2 decades. They have no idea how close we are on the horizon to a major quake. Simply have no clue. And so we have a lot of education to do ahead of us here. But otherwise, I'm really pleased with where we are. I know we have a lot left to do, and I wish you good luck on all that's on your plate.
Thank you.
Okay?
So if I may.
Yeah.
So just to remind the board, the reason why we're here this evening was to follow up on concerns raised during the strategic planning meeting. And I just wanted to provide an update that there'll be additional opportunities to provide input on emergency preparedness and response. The tentative plan, we're hoping to get a draft document to you, the result of the strategic planning workshop, as early as February 8th at the next board meeting. We probably won't make too much of a presentation, but we'll be asking for you to review that. Just to kind of give you a heads up, it's going to be a high-level strategic planning document with the priorities of the agency as we heard it from the board, and the schedule, rough schedule for those priorities. And that will be an opportunity to provide input on those high-level priorities. Then, around the May time period, that's my annual performance evaluation. For that, we will have available new and improved dashboards for the board that link to the strategic plan. So these dashboards will roll up into the strategic planning priorities so that you'll have another opportunity to take a look at what we're focusing on as an agency and how we're doing overall in the case we need to make any adjustments. So just kind of wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. There'll be more opportunities to talk about the issues that were discussed today and more check-ins with the board. So that's the plan.
That covers the general manager's report?
No, we have one additional special request item for the general manager's report.
Okay.
Rainfall report.
Oh, yes.
So we'll just quickly show you that.
Director Sethy's request for update on rainfall.
This will be real brief.
Thank you,
Good,
Jim.
no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, all genuine and true. Thank you. It was a great opportunity for all the work I had to put in this and come forward for it. It was a great opportunity.
Go ahead. Okay, we reconvened at 8:55 p.m.
Thank you, President Sethy. And in closed session, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, the board met with its agency-designated negotiators, Robert Shaver, Jennifer Rogers, and Glenn Berkheimer, relative to Employee Organizations Operating Engineers Local 3 and ACWD Operators Association, and the board provided direction to its agency-designated negotiators. And that's our closed session report.
All right. Any further comments from the board? Questions? Should we adjourn? Okay, we will adjourn the meeting for this evening.
We adjourn at 7:59, rather
8:59.
8:59. Okay.